Morning, everyone. I'd like to call the Community Service and Public Safety Committee meeting to order. If everyone will please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. And we have some minutes to approve. How many are there? I'm like literally trying to rush through this, aren't I? May I get a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? All right, now we have a number of minutes to approve. We have the regular minutes from April 8th, 2024. We have the regular minutes from May 20th, 2024. We have a special meeting minutes from June 3rd, 2024, and special meeting minutes of June 5th, 2024. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second. I have a small typo from May 20. I'll have to just hand to the deputy clerk.
Okay, all in favor?
No worries.
All right, good. Now on to new business. We have a consideration of a resolution adopting a beach parking fee schedule, and Josh Gruber, our deputy town manager, is going to make a presentation for us. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. All right, let's do this. So, I'm going to go over a presentation today that's going to accomplish several things. Get this loaded up here. So, first and foremost, we're going to start off by talking about defining the purpose of this program, what we're looking to accomplish through these actions. We're going to review some of the procedural history in this matter. We've had a number of meetings, and so we're going to kind of refresh just the last couple of ones and some of the talking points and issues that had come up and some of the information that we're bringing back to you in response. We're also going to look at current and future budget implications for this program, and we'll discuss some recommendations that we have for your consideration. Although I will say at the outset, and I'll probably repeat myself several times, this program is a program that is scalable, it is flexible, it can be moved in a number of different ways. And so ultimately, we can prepare whatever it is that this body feels comfortable with in terms of making a recommendation to council. And ultimately, we can tailor anything the council may request in terms of an actual program to move forward with. So at the end of the day and at the end of our discussion, there's going to be a number of policy questions for you as a committee to decide and hopefully act upon. Those include things like establishing a rate, location, hours, resident beach parking passes, and then employee parking concerns in the Coligny area, all of which we're going to go over in a lot greater detail as we move through this presentation. So first and foremost, let's review the program's purpose. We've outlined 5 objectives that are listed here as basically constituting the goals of this program. First and foremost is to try to control demand and influence beach parking decisions, to communicate timely information on beach parking availability and alternative parking options, provide paid parking areas that are safe and secure, provide a paid parking program that is convenient, user-friendly, and provides superior customer service to the end user. And then also a program that protects adjoining neighborhoods and businesses from paid parking overflow impacts. And you can see that this information has been included within a purpose statement, which is included in the draft ordinance that's already come out of this committee. But it essentially embodies those points within the statement of purpose for these regulations. So looking back on the last couple of meetings that we've had, we had a meeting September 18th of 2023. The Community Services and Public Safety Committee voted unanimously to move the draft ordinance for the backbone of the actual legislation forward out of committee to town council. Following that were several rounds of discussions on the beach parking fee structure. In consultation with the mayor, a decision was made to hold off on moving the ordinance forward until both the ordinance and the resolution setting forward the parking rate structure could be taken up together at town council. And so just to refresh it, the ordinance that's already been moved out of this body and is pending before town council would do a number of things. The ordinance would rescind antiquated and outdated language that's currently within our code. There's a lot of references to coin-operated machinery and some other things which just really aren't applicable in today's technology day and age. It also defines a Hilton Head resident as previously directed by town council. It exempts registered island residents from having to pay for paid parking. It designates paid parking within all of the town's identified beach parking areas, and it designates paid parking dates and times to be determined by town council through the adoption of a resolution. It also sets forth a series of graduated penalties that are imposed for improper parking or failing to pay the required parking fees. And it then also sets forth an administrative penalty system associated with those graduated penalties. And so this is not something that would go to a court. This is something that would be handled administratively through the town. And we've relied upon several other jurisdictions that have similar structures for this type of system in terms of structuring it in this manner. So looking back at the actions of the committee with regards to discussing establishing parking rates. Our last two meetings consisted of a meeting on December 18th of last year and again on April 8th of this year. And during those meetings, this body provided several points that they asked staff to investigate further, to gather some additional information and to come back to you with this information, which we're going to go over today. The first one was to ensure that we were clearly defining the purpose of the beach parking program. We've covered those items today, and so I think we've successfully established that. We were asked to review current and future budgets and to develop a 5-year revenue and expense projection that would reflect program implementation and subsequent investments. We have actually created a 10-year revenue and expense projection that we're going to review with you today. And again, because of the scalability and the flexibility of this program, there's several different options that we've put in here for your consideration. Define the hours of operation for these beach parks along with the corresponding hours that parking fees will be charged. We have a recommendation for you in this regard that we can discuss. We've developed parking rate scenarios that incorporate a policy decision not to charge for parking at Chaplin Beach Park while youth athletic activities are occurring. That is one of 2 points that have been consistent within this body that appears to have broad-based support, which would be to not implement paid parking at the Chaplin Beach Park while youth recreational activities are ongoing. The second is a desire to look at removing or eliminating the resident beach parking pass fee. And so I can tell you that both of those points, while not originally contained within the ordinance that came out of this committee, have been included for future consideration by council, given the comments and feedback that this committee has made on both of those issues. So lastly, we're going to review the policy questions for the committee and council to ultimately determine, and then we'll review timeline for implementation of those policy recommendations. So we started this process by looking at what are other similarly situated communities doing with regards to implementing paid beach parking. And you can see from this chart here that there's a number of communities both in South Carolina and then a smattering of communities around us in North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Alabama. Again, just for purposes of trying to compare ourselves to others. If you see from an hourly standpoint, the rates are quite low with the exception of Wrightsville Beach and Tybee, which are both $5 an hour and $4 an hour respectively. However, I would point to a lot of them implement either flat rate fees such as Charleston County Beach Park, which is $20 per day on the weekends and $15 per day during the week, well, in season. And a number of communities have similarly structured rates like this. And if you look at if the average parking session is around 3.5 hours, when you factor that in, our proposed discussion of our rate is in line with many other communities across this state and around this area. So let's look at what we're currently doing in terms of paid parking, because the town does actively have paid parking that exists today. Right now, we have 4 locations that range from either 50 cents an hour or $1 an hour, and you can see those listed there in this chart. The current hours of operation align with the current hours of the parks, which are all based seasonally, which means it's 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. during the summer, and it's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. during the winter. One of the things that we're going to talk about here in a little bit is how we're proposing to amend that to be consistent across seasons and within all of the parks. So this looks at what our expenses were last budget for our parking services. And you'll see that the total budget figure was a little bit more than $860,000. And a substantial portion of that, a little over $500,000, was a lot of our upfront expenses for the gate arms, the cameras, a lot of the technology backbone that we now have in place today for all of these facilities, as well as providing some staffing. This is this year's budget, and so the current contracted rate is $623,000. You'll see the majority of that is now operating expenses, with it going towards staffing and then a number of incidental things that they need in terms of providing those overhead expenses. So ultimately, this is the current amount that the town is paying on an annual basis to manage our beach parking program. And as you'll see, one of the goals of bringing this proposal forward to implement paid parking would be to have this expense fully covered, therefore not relying upon general fund funding in order to pay for this expense. We want the program to be self-sufficient, and then any additional revenues that may be generated, we're going to discuss a number of potential options for you to consider on how to use those funds to reinvest within parking and infrastructure within these parks, and also how we could potentially expand it into the future to create additional capacity and opportunities. So the rate elements that we're looking at now, and this is kind of looking at what we have currently with what we're going to be discussing in terms of a proposal. Currently, we have 4 locations charging anywhere from 50 cents to $1 an hour. When you add up the number of parking spaces that are within those 4 locations, it's 266. Utilization, again, is going to vary significantly based upon seasonally. During the summertime, we see a lot more demand for parking than what we do during off-season time. And so if you spread that out, it goes anywhere from 10% during the low season up to 80% during the high season. And again, that's to try to capture both really peak times, such as weekends and holidays, non-peak times during the daytime, and ultimately come up with something that we can rely upon moving forward for our calculations. What we're considering in terms of possibilities are 5 to 7 locations, depending upon the direction of this committee and town council, anywhere from $0 at some of those locations up to $5 an hour at all locations. Again, if we're looking at a minimum of maintaining the paid parking that's in place now, it would be a minimum of 266 spaces, but could be upwards of 1,101 spaces when you add in other available parking areas. And then with the application of the seasonal parking at Chaplin, during those times where youth recreational events are in place, that number reduces down to about 758. Again, utilization is going to be somewhere between 10 to 80% depending upon time of year. And what we're going to propose for this body to consider and recommend to council is establishing normalized operating hours that would be from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. year-round, and a proposal to implement paid parking within that time frame from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We believe that this allows for some flexibility for some folks. If you want to go out and watch the sunset on the beach, you can do that without necessarily having to pay. If you want to go down and have dinner somewhere in the evening, you could likewise go down and do that without having to pay. One of the other things that we're looking at currently, there is no cap. You pay per hour regardless of how long you are there, but we are recommending discussion of a cap of $30 per day if we move forward with implementing a rate structure. So let's look at what our revenue projections would be, and this is based upon a one-year collection. And what we've shown here is what those figures would be at a rate of $3 an hour, at a rate of $5 an hour, which is our recommendation for your consideration, and then what $7 an hour would be, and then a $30 a day cap if you have high utilization of that program. This shows you here during the months, the utilization percentage. It is looking at all available parking spaces, so 1,101, but we factor in here a lower utilization percentage to take into account that Chaplin Beach Park is not likely to be activated during that time, and therefore parking would be collected from other areas around there, but still only looking at a 10 to 25% utilization rate. You can see here, bottom line, this is the gross revenue that is anticipated based upon these calculations. So at a rate of $3 an hour, be a little bit over 1.6 million. At a rate of $5 an hour, 2.7. $7 an hour would be 3.8. And then again, going back to if it's used at the cap, it would be $2 or 2,879,000. So looking at taking that 1 year projection and running it out to a 10-year period, and again, at the recommended rate of $5 per hour with a cap of $30 per day, if we're implementing collection year-round, this is the annual amount that we would expect as a net revenue collection. So one of the things that's being taken out here is the annual expenses. We're going to go over those here shortly. That figure represents essentially your labor costs and then some of your incidental expenses. It does not include fringe benefits, which we would probably say would be about 40% of your salary costs as just a kind of placeholder. So we would anticipate that would be about another $150,000 to implement fringe benefits, depending upon the number of full-time employees you have versus seasonal versus part-time. So ultimately, this figure you could take down by about another 150, and that would probably be a true net after all of your expenses for your personnel. And so this does an inflation factor of 3% in terms of going from year 5 to year 6, and then a 4% inflation, or I'm sorry, take that back, 4% inflation factor going from year 5 on revenue and a 3% inflation factor on your expenses. Now, if we looked at doing seasonal collection, and what we mean by seasonal collection is you would collect essentially during your busier months out of the year. That would be from March 1st until September 30th of each year. And one thing I think is worth highlighting is implementing this seasonal application really only reduces your revenues by a projected $200,000 each year. And I think that's to reflect that during those periods that are outside of our peak season, we don't have as much demand on our beach parking, and so we're using very low occupancy rates of those spaces. Not to say that there aren't still people coming, but it's just not in demand like it is during the spring, summer, and fall seasons. And so when we get to making a recommendation, due to the limited difference between this figure and this figure, our recommendation for you to consider is a seasonal application of beach parking, primarily targeted at our busiest times of the year. I mentioned our expenses. This is the breakdown in those costs when you look at labor, expenses going up, and then your other expenses, your overhead, capital, equipment, and things like that. And again, those are the annual rates, but do not include fringe benefit costs. And for comparative purposes, I mentioned current contract for FY25 with PCI is $623,789, which again, if you factor in the fringe benefits, is comparable to what we would pay either internally or externally through this contract. So let's look at staff recommendations in terms of just providing you something to consider and then getting your feedback to go from there. As I mentioned before, and we'll mention again, this program is scalable, it is sizable, it is seasonal. We can really be as flexible as we want. We just need to understand where this body supports, what they don't support, and then ultimately move this forward to council for its consideration of those same different proposals. And so as you see here, we have the current charges and what we're proposing, which is $5 an hour at all locations, but a seasonal application that would be in place from March 1st until September 30th. The hours that paid parking would be implemented would be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And then there are certain places, so for example, Dreesen Beach Park has limited places for dedicated island resident. We would not be charging there because if you have a beach pass, and only people with beach passes should be parking in those spots, you would not be paying. So we want to call that out, that really doesn't change for those particular areas that have reserved parking spaces for pass holders. So, a couple of things here as we start getting into the policy questions. Over the last 2 years, the town has collected approximately $105,000 per year from resident beach parking passes. That equates to about 7,000 passes per year at a cost of $15 per pass. Current regulations allow for 2 passes per household, but this number can be increased as a matter of policy if supported by this body and town council. With the implementation of paid beach parking, staff is proposing that the $15 annual resident fee for passes be eliminated, thereby essentially allowing anybody who has a pass to park for free, not only at the designated spots, but at any paid parking spot on the island. That would cover not only residents, but also any employees who are also island residents. PCI would continue to administer the issuance of passes. Again, you would still have to register showing the documentation that we currently require. So that would continue to allow those license plates of those vehicles to be input into the system, and that is then what's ultimately checked out in the field in terms of compliance with our parking regulations. A full-time attendant in Islanders is continuing to be used to ensure that resident parking spaces are protected and only those with valid passes are allowed to park outside of the 25 outside of the 25 first come, first serve parking spaces that are open to the public at Islanders. And again, there's a roaming attendant that's used at Dreesen and seasonal employees at all other locations. We are coordinating and can coordinate with surrounding residential communities in order to implement a resident parking pass system. We've heard some varying comments on this. Some don't want any parking along the road whatsoever. Others want to allow for some flexibility so that if they have a birthday party or some other celebration and they're inviting people over, that for some limited time or limited purpose, they would be able to use on-street parking. That's something, again, we can tailor to the needs of each individual community, and we'd have to work with them directly to scope out what that would look like, and then ultimately we would bring it before this body and town council for approval as a formally designated residential parking pass system. But it's something that with our vendor and through the technology we have the ability to implement this once we know what each individual community wants in terms of those restrictions. So we've been asked over the years kind of what the thoughts are primarily from some of the Coligny business owners. Obviously, this could have an impact on them if we go from not having paid parking to implementing paid parking. And so we've met with those owners. We began meeting with those representatives back in 2020. We've had meetings with them again in 2021, 2022, and most recently in January of 2024. And I can tell you that their comments on this matter and this subject have been uniform and consistent throughout these conversations. They are concerned that any charge for paid parking will result in a decrease to local business revenues. They're concerned that any charge for parking will further exacerbate existing employee attraction and retention concerns. They've stated that employee parking solutions that we've discussed before at this body and that we'll continue to discuss again today will either be underutilized or not utilized at all by their staff, and that implementing paid parking will further exacerbate already existing parking concerns within the surrounding business areas within the Coligny area. I mentioned the employee parking considerations. Again, as part of these conversations, we've identified several options for this committee to consider. And we can go a number of different ways with this, but again, in order to try to coalesce around some option, we wanted to provide you with our recommendations today. But essentially what we did was we used our business license records and then our GIS services to identify the number of businesses that were currently on file with us that were located within a 100-yard radius of the Coligny Beach parking lot. And using that information, we identified 146 businesses. And in order to try to identify the number of employees, we're having to use some assumptions because not all the businesses are the same size, nor are all the businesses operated in the same way. Obviously, you may have a business that is a sole owner operator, but you also have some large hotels in the area that employ a large number of people. Same with restaurants and some of the other businesses. So in order to try to account for those differences between them, we've looked at an average of 4 employees per business that will try to take into account business size, shift coverage, people coming in and out. And so you have multiple employees, but they don't necessarily work a 12-hour day. They'll work some portion of a 12-hour day. And then also seasonal employment. You have some businesses that upstaff during the summer and they'll downstaff again during the winter. And so to try and take that information and to come up with a figure, I believe that if you take 146 times 4, it should be 584 employees. And so again, that is just a general estimate of the population size that we may be looking at, again, within a football field's length of walking distance from this parking lot. One of the options that we've provided as a recommendation would be that the town could set aside approximately 120 to 160 dedicated employee parking spaces at the site of the former Wild Wing Cafe property. Those spaces would be available on a first-come, first-served basis. That way, we're not really controlling the volume of parking that's available, but it is there as a resource for employees to utilize. Employees would have to register similarly to resident beach parking passes. We would need to verify things like current employment to make sure that they are in fact an employee of a business that is within that area and not an in-business that's, off of Squire Pope Road. And so we've also identified that we could create remote park and ride options. We've had a conversation with Palmetto Breeze, who's our regional transit authority. They've indicated that they can provide transportation services at a cost of about $60 an hour plus travel time. But they did indicate that providing drivers late into the evening could become problematic. They have to find drivers who are willing to provide those routes. And they've just indicated that based upon their prior experiences, after a certain point in time, drivers are just not interested in providing those shuttle routes. But again, it is an option that if council and committee wanted to pursue, we do have some information that would allow us to create a proposal in that regard. And as I indicated earlier, the Cligney business owners have stated that they have concerns that either one of these options that we might implement would be problematic for their employees to use, either because they would choose not to or they're going to seek out other options. So let me kind of sum up what it is that we are proposing to you to consider, and then we'll start answering any questions that you have with regards to this information. So resident parking passes would be free and limited to a number per household that would be determined by town council. Paid parking would not be imposed at Chaplin Beach Park during youth recreation seasons. Paid parking would be imposed at all town beach parks from March 1st to September 30th of each year. The parking fee would be set at $5 per hour with a cap of $30 per day. Paid parking would be imposed from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. with the parks themselves being open from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And that parking spaces would be provided within the former Wild Wing Cafe property for designated employee parking on a first-come, first-served basis. And that revenues generated from this paid parking would be reinvested into the parking program to support any one of the following. First, the cost of managing the beach parking program. As I mentioned to you, one of the goals is to have this program be self-supporting and so not utilize any funding coming from ad valorem taxes or from the general fund. In addition to that, we also provide a number of maintenance, cleaning, and upkeep currently of those beach parking facilities. And so again, those costs that we're already incurring on an annual basis could be paid for out of these revenues since they directly go to the quality of those properties themselves. We could also use these revenues to provide enhanced enforcement measures for surrounding areas through hiring additional staff or providing other technology that could be utilized within those communities themselves. Additionally, we can continue to invest in our technology and communication capabilities. More and more, if we can provide real-time data and information to the public, it allows them to make informed decisions, which goes to that first bullet point that we talked about influencing their beach parking behaviors. And then lastly, there's the ability to invest in future beach parking capacity and infrastructure, as evidenced by the acquisition of the Wild Wing Cafe property, which was a $4 million acquisition. That could have been supported using beach parking revenues, since it is directly going back to support beach parking in some kind of tangible way. And so again, as an example, land acquisition, park and ride development, and investment in multimodal transportation are all things that could be looked at in terms of using these revenues to, again, support the program itself. So the questions that are going to be posed to you today that we're hoping to get answers on to move this matter forward to town council. With the resident parking passes, again, I mentioned early on, this committee's been fairly consistent in terms of wanting to do away with the $15 per parking pass, but I do understand that there's been some questions raised about the number of passes that can be issued per household, and so I wanted to tee that issue up for this body to discuss. We're looking at, several aspects of establishing a parking rate. The first one is location. Do we want to impose it everywhere? Do we only want to have it at select locations? We have the flexibility to do any of these options. We just need the guidance on which one this committee supports. Timing, again, the recommendation from staff, because of the limited difference in the revenues that would be collected, would be to implement this seasonally. But again, we can implement it year-round as well, and we showed you kind of what the financial implications of both of those would be. The hours of operation are subject to policy direction from this body and from town council. We've made a proposal, and we can defend based upon some other criteria that are outside of beach parking concerns, but we believe that this is a good starting point in terms of putting a program in place, evaluating how it goes from an implementation standpoint, and then making additional adjustments later on if necessary. And then finally, the hourly rate itself. We've got 50 cents an hour at one location and $1 an hour at several others. We're proposing a flat rate of $5 per hour, again, based upon looking at market rate of parking that's provided in other similarly situated communities. Lastly, dealing with employee parking concerns, we've proposed providing dedicated spaces, but there's also the ability to issue a monthly pass. Again, similar to the way that we do the resident beach parking pass, we could establish that registration system, and the fee for that parking pass then could be set at any value that would be established by this committee or council. We are aware that there are some other communities that have gone that way and implement a reduced rate for employees. So that is an option. And then lastly, we discussed that we could create a remote lot with shuttle services, understanding that there may be some limitations to that when it comes to timing and the hours of operation of that shuttle service. So I've answered all the information that I wanted to bring for you. What questions can I answer for you today?
Thank you, Josh. That was a lot of information. Where we come from and how we got here, and I'm going to start off, Alex.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair.
Start with your question.
Sure. Mr. Gruber, thank you for continuing this conversation and giving us qualified information to do so. I wanted to start with the financial performer. The parking utilization, is that assumptions, or is that based on data that we've collected now that we have some technology in place?
It's a little bit of both. It's based upon some observed conditions, and I'm going to pull up a document here if you'll bear with me. So PCI has been calculating some of our occupancy at various times over the course of the last several months. And so it's using these figures to identify over the high season kind of what that 80% is supposed to reflect. Some days, particularly on afternoons and weekends, you'll see that we have 100% utilization for a majority of the day. Other times it may not get as much during the middle of the week. And so it's partly based upon some of the observed data that PCI has collected. It's also based upon what we've also seen over a 12-month period at some of the other beach parks where they haven't necessarily tracked this specific occupancy data.
But this document is reflecting 2023 data.
That is correct.
Do we have any 2024 data?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm confident that they have this same information and we can provide it to you and to council.
Okay, I'm raising that question, colleagues, because obviously we have had some discussions about some trends that we're seeing from a budgetary standpoint, particularly when it comes to our A-tax and H-tax collections. And it seems to be a downward trend. So I'm curious to know what the utilization has been in 2024, because to me that is a lot more relevant than...
I would tell you that the impacts to utilization have likely been less than what we're seeing in terms of overnight accommodations or hospitality. And part of that is because you've got a large population that's coming from off island, on island during those peak times, and they're not necessarily staying overnight, and they may not be going out to eat while they're here. And so we'll be able to provide that data, but I think at least in terms of the observations that they've seen, we're still seeing 100% occupancy just about every weekend, especially during the summer season, holidays for certain, and then it tails off both on the shoulders, both before and after.
Okay. Do we have any idea what the current revenues look like from the, I guess, 50 cents per hour, whatever we're paying at the moment?
We do. Apologies, I'm trying to find the right one. I've got a plethora of spreadsheets here. So the biggest revenue generator right now is the resident beach parking passes, which is about $105,000 a year. I think what we've seen from the existing collections from the other meters, when those meters are working, and we've had some significant issues from an operational standpoint, keeping those online consistently, it was about another $100,000. And so we do have that information. But
No significance compared to what we're talking about. Okay, fair
No,
enough.
sir.
All right. The other question I have, and just let me say out loud that, I think we've checked the boxes when it comes to our purpose and need, with the exception of how we're going to deal with the situation down in Caligny, because Caligny is the only beach park that has the business community as significant in this equation. So when we talk about Palmetto Breeze potentially $60 per hour, I did a little rough math, but I'm just curious, have we extended that to see what it would cost us annually?
We have. So,
Yeah.
and it really would be when you would want to have a shuttle service in place, but it's about, so at $60 an hour, it was about $360 a day, $36,000 if we implemented it from the high season. So we likely wouldn't need to implement it year round just because the occupancy wouldn't necessarily be there. But we know that with a $60 per hour rate, we can scale it to however much council would want to look at imposing it. I just want to reemphasize the biggest thing that they communicated to me is we may not be able to provide hours late into the evening. So if you've got restaurants or others that have people that are getting off at, particularly late hours of the evening, they were concerned about staffing drivers for that service.
I would make an assumption that Palmetto Breeze is not the only game in town if we wanted to subcontract that work out, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I guess to that point, I saw one of your spreadsheets as you were going through it. I'm assuming that we've done some study of Caligny not being a part of this exercise, and there's a differential there, I'm assuming as well.
Yes, sir. So you can see here, without implementing paid parking at Caligny, the revenue generated at $5 an hour would be about $1 million less per year.
I'm good for now, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just follow up on a couple of your questions that came to mind? Absolutely. Off Island, as you mentioned. It's still on red, even if I'm pushing it back. Sorry. Oh, thank you. Oh, there you go. I have two of them. No one wants to hear me that much. Off Island, and then we've always talked about, everyone is the chatter about all of the off-island development. So this isn't just necessarily concerns about 23, 24, but it's also the very fast-paced and sure to come development off-island that will be bringing those folks who believe that Hilton Head is their beach to the island that we're preparing for. So it's also that I want to note we're taking into consideration as well with the planning.
I think it's also important, just based upon some of the feedback that we are getting from PCI, there's areas of rapid growth that are outside of communities here in Beaufort County, but Pooler, Rincon, those kind of areas are growing exponentially as well. And one of the observational comments that they made was that there was a significant number of Georgia plates in the vehicles that were in the lot. So I think it's not only here, but it is also the greater surrounding area.
Correct. So I just wanted to make sure that I noted that that's part of this is in thinking and preparation for the inevitable off-island. With Palmetto Breeze, we currently have a beach shuttle. What is that expense calculated into the bigger expense that you gave us with $624,000 roughly?
Here we go. So this spreadsheet shows a number of different things. That is separate and apart. One of the things that we provide now is ongoing beach management and monitoring. And so this is straight from our current budget. We have $300,000 in the FY25 budget for beach monitoring, endangered species, beach program, economic sustainability, a number of other things. This is actually beach renourishment. Again, an option for the committee and council to consider. It's not necessarily required, but the revenue generated from beach parking could go towards paying for beach renourishment. The shuttle service that you mentioned is right here. Currently, the annual cost is about $24,000. And again, it would be an eligible expense that if we wanted to pay for that service out of beach parking revenues, we could.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then the last question, and Alex, your questions were great, but I wanted to just follow up on a couple of them that got me thinking. When we talk about the concerns about the late evening workers who may not have that shuttle access if they were to park remotely, I would be interested to know from the business community, what time do those shifts start? Is it after the time that we would be ending the requirement for paid parking anyway? And so they would have complete access free of charge. First of all, if they're a resident on the island, they clearly would at any time. But for those who might be coming from other places, after our hours of fee charge has ended. So that's really, I think, an answer to and a solution for those late night concerns. So thank you, Alex, for helping me think through some of those. And turn to Patsy.
First of all, thanks, Mr. Gruber, for all the data. It's very, very helpful. Initially, I have a threshold legal question, we sent some documentation over the weekend. I passed it along to the mayor and town manager, asked the town attorney to be here. So I guess my initial question for the town attorney, Madam Chair, is are there any legal questions about the staff proposal with regard to beach parking?
And I would ask Curtis to, if you would, for purposes of our record and the video.
Chairman, members of the board, my name is Curtis Coltrane, and I represent the town. Over the weekend, I did receive some information related to a question that was raised about the impact of a statute that is Title 57, Chapter 5, Section 845, that deals with parking facilities in beach communities. However, what the statute says in its very first 6 words is that parking facilities on state highway facilities located in beach communities that are eligible for beach nourishment funds, and then it says certain other things. The statute deals with parking facilities that are in the state highway right-of-way. The town's parking is all on town-owned real estate, and this statute does not reach that. So to the extent that is the question, the highway department doesn't have anything to say about what the town does on its own property and in its own parking facilities.
Thank you, sir.
Was that it?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Curtis while he's here? No? Okay. Thank you, Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Coltrane. So then, Mr. Gruber.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm looking at, in the staff report, the section about establish a daily paid parking fee. In Table 5A, same chart that Mr. Brown turned your attention to about parking utilization. So year one revenue projections, and there's a $3 per hour, $5 per hour, $7 per hour, and a $30 per day calculation. So the staff is recommending $5 per hour, and I know you showed us the chart with other jurisdictions, which can range up to as high as $5. It seems like $5 and $4 are a bit of the outliers. So I'm just wondering, looking at the cost that you've shown us, the annual cost of the program versus the revenue, the projected revenue stream, why $5 was chosen instead of the other numbers.
So from an hourly rate standpoint, I would agree with you. The $5 an hour and $4 an hour kind of are the top of the range from the other communities that we surveyed. But what doesn't show there is a lot of those communities do not charge by the hour at all. They have a flat daily rate. And so if we kind of back into what that would be on an hourly basis using the average parking session of 3.5 hours per day, that's where you see that there are more and more communities that are in that $4 to $5 per hour if they're charging $20 per day, regardless of the number of people. And so we do think it's competitive from that standpoint and holds up in terms of comparison with other communities. I would also argue, maybe more from a personal standpoint, that if you've been to many of these communities, they do provide beach parking, but they don't provide restrooms. They don't provide a lot of the other amenities and infrastructure that we provide. And so I would argue that our facilities are significantly better than what people are paying for in other communities just for the right to park in a particular space.
Okay. And my next question has to do with data that perhaps observations from PCI during this summer. I certainly saw some photographs, one personal anecdote about the specifically Coligny Beach parking lot and folks parking, I call it creative parking, that's probably too kind, but parking all over the place to the effect of some of it is the destruction of our property. And so what can you tell us about the experience this past summer with parking at Coligny Beach parking area?
Absolutely. So I would say that Memorial Day is really the photos that you saw and the haphazard parking all over the place. I think they were unprepared and understaffed to be ready for that type of volume. We learned a significant lesson that day. So when we came back for July 4th, you didn't see those kind of issues, even though we had similar volumes. And so we understood where they needed to position people, when they needed to be there. And ultimately, we upped our enforcement. We ended up towing some vehicles that were kind of egregiously parked, particularly if they'd been given instructions, don't park here, they parked there anyway. Well, several of those vehicles were towed, and we made sure to broadcast that information to let folks know we're serious. We will be out there enforcing this, and we're expecting you to kind of meet certain standards. And so, yes, we did have that at the beginning of the season, but by the end of the season, I think we had the program where it needed to be to manage the parking volume.
Okay. I think I recall the hours of operation for our contractor PCI ends at 4 p.m. And I'm trying to remember, does it begin at 9 or 10 a.m.?
It is, I believe, 9 a.m. because that's typically when we start seeing the increase in volumes. And again, that is scalable in terms of if we want to have them there greater hours, we can work with them. It's just based upon the current adopted budget. That's the schedule that it provides for.
And with the projections that you provided to us, does that, and the suggestion that the paid parking, seasonal or not, be from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., do those projections for expenses include someone there to enforce the regulations from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at all the parks?
It does. So the analysis that Adriana had put together on that labor expense, and again, it does not include fringe benefits. I don't want to say it's an apples to apples comparison, but that cost was to have several full-time employees year-round, but to have a significant increase in seasonal employees during that part of the year, which is accounted for. So if you're looking at those net revenue figures, that does take into account 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. restrictions.
Okay, all right. And then Also, in the draft ordinance, we talked about that separately a little bit, Madam Chair, I think. Now focused on the parking rates, the staff proposal on that. But there are some special events that the town has, or special events that other community organizations have. It's my understanding that the town manager would provide for, has the authority to provide exemptions for those events. I think you had one of the revenue charts about the impact on that as well, so it would reduce those projections for certain time periods. And my question is about the balance of, particularly if there's a symphony night in the summer, I'll just give the symphony as an example, and you have folks still at the beach and folks trying to come to an earlier start or get a special spot there at Low Country Celebration Park, then how do you manage the free parking for the symphony event compared to the beach parking?
So essentially, you manage that through your enforcement. So it's not a whole lot different than when you have, say, parking meters that are along a street. You can have that, you can park there beginning at 5 a.m. in the morning, but parking may not begin to be collected until 7. Your enforcement starts at 7 and then monitors that going forward. But if you have a special event and they come by and they put the bag on top of the meter, that means they're no longer collecting. So you just coordinate with your parking enforcement company to understand, okay, we will collect from this window to this window, but not from this window to this window.
Okay, so if I decide to come early, and I've got on my shorts and my appropriate foot gear, of course, appropriate clothing, I'll just say it that way, and I go out to the beach for a couple hours, but I tell them I'm here for the symphony.
Yeah, so you can't do it based upon somebody's intention, because again, you're not going to follow them from the time they get out of the car to see where they're going to go. So you do it based upon hours. So if you've got a special event that starts at, say, 5 p.m., you could say that free parking begins at 4 p.m. Regardless of what you're going there to do, if you show up at 3, you're going to pay from 3 to 4 if you're there early or if you're there to go to the beach, because that's the way that you would regulate the implementation of paid parking.
Okay, great. My husband's favorite question, because we've experienced this before, is that if you go to a parking place and you have to pay, and you can only pay for an hour, and then you have to come back and pay again. But as I understand, there can be remote pay. I can be sitting on the beach and go on my cell phone and go like, you know what, I'm having a great time. I want to add another hour. So we have the capability to do that.
We absolutely do. So that's one of the things, in order to make this system work, it needs to be convenient, because you're looking at what's the next alternative that they might consider. And a lot of folks now, if they can just pull up their phone, they can type in a number, they can pay by their phone, and they're on the beach within 3 minutes, you're going to get a number of people that are willing to do that. And we've seen that by the implementation of this system in many other beach communities. So that needs to be a component of it. And the more convenient it can be, the more likely people are to be willing to use it. Because at this point, there's very limited expectations that somebody should come to a beachfront community and expect to find free parking. We just don't see that in any other community. And so, again, if we can make it convenient, we believe that there's going to be a substantial amount of compliance with this. Will it be 100%? No. No system will ever provide you 100%, which is why you still need to have enforcement with it. But a convenient and safe and reliable system will help to ensure maximum participation.
In order to provide for that ability to do the remote pay, if you will, and to know whether there's spaces or not, do we, the capital equipment we've already purchased, does that already allow for that, or does this mean we're going to have to purchase additional hardware and software?
So I think that there would be a software cost, because there's a program that we're currently paying for through PCI, but as far as the hardware goes, that is infrastructure that we now own. And so if for some reason we decided that we wanted to internalize that in the future, we would have the ability to use it, but we may need to pay for a software subscription to use some portions of it.
All right.
And Ms. Bryson, if I could, you mentioned the question about special events, and I knew it was in the code here, and I just wanted to find it. So it has it right here, under exemptions, the town manager may establish additional exemptions during permitted special events.
Yes, thank you.
We didn't want to try to capture all of them, because it's going to change from year to year,
Right.
But it could set forth that with the understanding of council, if it is, hey, if there's going to be a permitted special event, we're going to allow for free parking for an hour before and an hour after. And one of the reasons why we picked the 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. schedule is that currently our special event permits expire at 10 p.m. and that's the time that things are supposed to be wrapped up. And so we wouldn't want people coming into the park after 10 p.m., but they could always leave from the park after that point.
Okay, all right. So entrance, no. Exit, yes, because
Correct.
some folks like to hang out and visit after the.
Absolutely, yeah. The gate arms would go down to prevent anybody else from coming in after that point,
Right.
but they would have the sensor to go up when anybody's
Be able to
leaving.
get out. Okay, great, all right. The Wild Wings property, I know we've talked about these numbers before, but I sure can't remember them. The existing, before demolition of the structure, how many spaces are existing?
I believe there's about 80 now that we kind of estimate. But again, once the building is removed and once the site is reconfigured, we're anticipating somewhere between 120 and 160 spaces.
Okay, I don't know, I remembered 122. Maybe it had an old TV show or something, I don't know, I think that was Room 222, but anyhow. Okay, so an increase from about 80 to up to 160.
That's it, depending upon how we restructure that configuration.
Okay, and hence the numbers that you put in for perhaps employee parking.
Correct.
Okay, all right. And so if this committee and the town council were to consider that, then no one else could park there.
It would be by registration system. So similar to a resident beach parking pass, it would be eligible on a first come, first served basis for free for any employee who would register, show proof of current employment with a business within that area. And again, subject to flexibility, we can go wider, we can go smaller. But that's how that would work. And then the way that the enforcement works is with the signage posted saying that it's restricted parking, your parking management company or code enforcement, depending upon who you're using, would go through, and they use a piece of equipment to essentially scan license plates, and that's then checking back against a database where those plates are registered, and as long as it's saying it's okay, you just keep driving through. But if it comes across a plate that's not registered, it flashes a warning, and the person can stop, they can get out, they can check a VIN, they can also issue a citation if that's what's needed.
Okay. But a resident with a pass couldn't do that. It
No,
would only
it's-
be employee passes.
Well, that's it. If we designate it as employee parking, we would set up a separate registration just for employees. Now, if the employee happens to be a resident, they could park not only in the employee area if they registered, but they could also park for free in the Caligny Beach lot with their resident beach parking pass.
And I know I'm talking about Symphony a lot. It's because it's the clearest example to me of some needs. So the Symphony members have had issues parking for Symphony events. So it would seem as though because of the location, I know there's some parking behind the stage there at Low Country Celebration Park, but the Wild Wings parking lot would be an ideal location, I think, for Symphony members to be able to park. But if it's only employee parking, that's a concern of mine, if we go that way.
Sure. I mean, ultimately, there's more demand than there is availability, and so we have to work around that. But as you indicated, if we wanted to create it as a multi-use lot, we certainly could. It would just take coordination with PCI. I think a better option would be, could we set aside dedicated spaces within the park in another location if that's a particular concern that needs to be addressed?
Okay. All right. I think those are the main questions, Madam Chair, about the parking rate structure that I have right now. I have some questions about the ordinance when we get there.
We will circle back and allow you to ask all those questions and have whatever comments we need to have as we move through. And again, I'm just going to take a minute because there were a couple of things that in your questions that came to my mind. Certainly with regard to special events, the town manager has total flexibility, and to solve the problem of the crossover between beachgoers and symphony attendees, or whatever the event may be, perhaps it would be a suggestion to, rather than an hour before and an hour after, to expand it so that that problem of those who want to stay a little bit later and come a little bit earlier, et cetera, would have, there would be no conflict there. I think that's an easy thing to solve in his discretion, handing that off to him. It also would allow for people who were coming to the beach to also attend the symphony, or after the symphony, walk across the street and go to the many restaurants and bars that are there and continue a lovely evening together. So I think that was a great question and a relatively, at least in my mind, at least one suggestion for a solution. The other thing that you brought up that I think is important is those gate sensors. Would it be possible that the gate sensor picks up the tag as the car is entering, but then instead of having to worry to remember on the beach to pay your next hour if you're choosing to stay a bit longer, to go to the and have additional fun, that it reads the license plate on the way out to and then charges the appropriate amount of money for that span?
I'd have to check on that. I know we have the capacity to basically scan license plates as they come in. I'm not sure. I know the way that the program would work now is as you come in, you're supposed to pay for parking once you are in a space, and you'd use the text by pay. And then if you're out on the beach, you're going to get a notification and a message 30 minutes beforehand, 15 minutes beforehand, that if you want to re-extend it, you could. My concern with connecting it to a vehicle coming out is if they didn't register in the first place, we wouldn't have any information for them to pay. We couldn't connect the payment to the person. We can always connect it to the vehicle.
Gotcha. Okay.
But it's something we can certainly talk about with PCI and try to explore
I think it gives
more.
more flexibility and less people who may not pay attention to their phones while they're on the beach, and hopefully they're enjoying themselves, having a great time. So, for whatever it's worth, question. And then the other thing that you brought up, the creative parking, as you call it, it's a concern. And we definitely hear from the residents, certainly in the Forest Beach, I wanted to say Follyfield, area, about their anxiety over what could happen. Anecdotally, I can tell you that I have not gotten issues brought to me from other beach communities like Follyfield. In the Bradley Circle area, we do not have these current concerns. In Seaside, where Chaplin is heavily utilized, and you were referencing back on Memorial Day and the creative parking that was taking place. Well, that still continues at Chaplin. We still have an overabundance of cars, but we do not find on any regular basis at any significant level that they are coming into our neighborhoods and using creative parking to find a free spot because of the use of the beach at those locations. So for whatever that's worth, anecdotally, I can certainly share that to hopefully alleviate some of the concerns for the neighbors in the Forest Beach community. And with that, thank you again, Patsy, for your questions, which struck a couple of thoughts in my mind. The hours I'll bring up when I start talking, but Steve, all yours.
Well, first, thanks, Mr. Gruber, for a very exhaustive, detailed presentation, answering a lot of questions. I've got a couple of small ones and one larger one. What was the staff's thinking about potentially increasing the rate during the August and July on Saturdays and Sundays?
We absolutely have the ability to do that if we wanted to charge one rate during the weekday and a higher premium during the weekend. We can absolutely look at that. I think as you saw in some of the examples, I remember Charleston Beach Park and Kiowa do something similar. They charge $15 per day during the week and $20 per day during the weekend. So again, with the system that we have in place, it is scalable, sizable, and flexible, that if that's something that we wanted to pursue, we could certainly cost that out and provide you with some analysis on that.
And a minor question of an experience that I had on a New Jersey beach. If I arrive at the beach at 6 a.m. and park, and they're not collecting at that time, can I park all day for free?
And the answer to that is no. And the reason is once paid parking gets implemented, the enforcement mechanism, just like a person walking by and checking a parking meter, if it's green because you've paid, you won't get a ticket. If it's red because you haven't paid and you're now past the point that it's required, you're going to get a citation. This is very similar, only they use the license plate reader machines to start checking vehicles after that certain point in time. And if they come across yours and you've not paid, you'll get a citation.
My larger concern is, while I think it is very desirable to move forward with paid parking, that we have to give very extensive consideration to the incidental effects of that, of which the primary ones are two: employees and customers. There's been a lot of material presented in terms of employees, but no real discussion or presentations with regard to what happens to customers. We all know that once beach parkers find that they have to pay money, they're going to go to the free spots. So that's a subject that seems to me that needs a lot more investigation and discussion.
So, Mr. Alford, I can tell you, even not charging parking now, that's already a concern. It's happening because demand is exceeding supply. And it really comes back to a problem in identifying what is the intent of somebody when they pull into that parking lot. Are they going to go shopping? Are they going to go eat? Or are they going to walk across the street to the beach? And unless you're following them from that vehicle to wherever their destination is, it's hard to know what that intent is at the time that they come into that lot. Now, we have had conversations, at least initially and early on, with some of the Caligny Beach owners, that there are options. If they wanted to look at implementing some kind of paid parking program, but then provide discounts or free parking, essentially a validation ticket at any of the businesses, that could be done. The concern is we don't want to propose a solution for them. We would have to work with them to identify something. We can propose solutions for our property and what we would do there based upon our recommendations. But I can tell you we're aware of that concern. It's already present today. It doesn't have a lot of great answers because of that difficulty in determining intent, but there are solutions out there. And we've seen it in other communities. There are other communities that have paid beach parking and commercial businesses, and they find a way to cohabitate with one another.
Does that include the commercial businesses establishing a similar parking plan?
Yes, sir.
Paid parking plan?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Those are great questions, and it makes me, I was listening to the answer about the green and the red checking in the parking lot, and it's something of an answer to my previous comment as well. So thank you for bringing that up.
Madam Chair, sorry, two more questions that
Sure,
have come up
feel
in my
free.
head on the parking regulations. So in response to Mr. Alfred's question, did the staff take a look at perhaps charging a flat fee for Saturdays and Sundays during the peak season?
So again, we can come up with a number of different scenarios. We just need some guidance.
Okay.
At this point, we've presented some flat fees, but with some flexibility, not only from an hour standpoint, but from a seasonal application standpoint. But if you wanted to take that even further to provide a weekday versus weekend, again, we can scale it however you want. We just need direction from this body of this is the way we'd like to consider it, and we'll be happy to prepare that data accordingly.
And a follow-up question to, and I think it had to do, I'm trying to remember, I did write down which chart it was on, but now I can't find where I wrote it down. But you had a chart which at the very bottom said coordinate with neighboring residential communities.
Mm-hmm.
And you described a little bit about that. Can you flesh that out a little bit more for me?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, I think,
There we go.
yeah, there we go, residential parking base, the very last bullet, thank you.
So essentially, this same system would allow us to develop a resident parking pass system that is tailored to a specific community or neighborhood. And again, based upon some of the conversations we've had already, what we've heard back, it really runs a gamut. So we couldn't put in a one-size-fits-all because, again, some communities have said, we do not want any on-street parking whatsoever. Let's put up signs, and if anybody parks there, ticket them and tow them. We've also had others that say, look, we need to have some flexibility that if we're going to have a Bible study over, if we're going to have a birthday party, We've heard of a number of different things. They want to have that flexibility. And essentially, we can craft it to be a number of different things. We just need to meet with those communities, develop a proposal that they support, bring it back for you for implementation, and then post signage accordingly and enforce it based upon that posted signage.
Could be an on-street parking system.
Yes,
temp-
it is almost all
temporary
primarily
on-street.
on-street parking.
Okay, thank you. Because I've been concerned about the spillover in the residential communities, in our beach parking lots, especially if we charge for parking. So that's a different scenario you're talking about. Thank you.
Alex, did you have another question? It looked like you might have.
Yeah, thank you. Just following up on Mr. Alfred's concern. So currently, we've got an expenditure here that we don't necessarily have the funds to cover. And we are pulling it from the general fund.
Yes, sir.
And the revenue stream that is supporting that is what?
It's a fraction of what the total cost is. Again, I think if I recall the numbers correctly, we're about $200,000 revenue and we're a minimum of $650 in annual expenses. And so this current budget year and the last year, we had to bring forward budget amendments to town council for consideration to Band-Aid the funding for this program. And I know I emphasized it at the last meeting, but I think it bears worth emphasizing again that if we cannot get to a point of having consensus about moving a program forward, we seriously need to look at, is this worth taking up our time and energy right now, or should we just step back from it? We will look at canceling the contract with PCI. We'll look at enforcement through our community code enforcement officers. But do we want to continue to incur this expense without having a revenue stream to pay for it?
The streams that are currently subsidizing this program would be, can you give some examples? Are we taking HTAX funds, ATAX funds? What funds are we using to subsidize?
I can tell you what we've done currently. I can't tell you what we would do going forward to continue it, but we've looked at just that. We've pulled from both HTAX funds and ATAX funds. So it's not been general ad valorem taxes, but those are revenue streams that we do use for operational and capital expenses. And so we've been able to make it work for the last 2 years. But again, our recommendation would be if we can't get a consensus to move this forward, let's look at taking a step back and focusing maybe on some other projects and initiatives rather than this one.
So I'm just keenly focused on the pro forma that has been produced for us at a $5 rate, as Councilman Bryson has pointed out. It seems to me that there's an opportunity to be sort of a zero outcome here if we charge a different amount, if we looked at particularly charging in different areas, okay? So I'm not sure, at least I have not heard council say we want to now start to have an additional revenue stream, profit revenue stream within the town. I've not heard that come from council members, okay? So I guess I'm sort of trying to set the table here. Yes, we've got an expense that we need to figure out how to pay for, but to me, not at the expense or not in a competing factor of a very, very significant business community here on Hilton Head. I think that's sort of the rub that we're dealing with here. And I'm curious to know, is there a way to get to that revenue neutral spot?
Yep.
If we were to charge a certain amount at the other parking lots, is sort of where my head is going at the moment.
Yes, sir. And actually, at the last meeting, we talked about an option that looked at collecting everywhere and an option that looked at collecting without colligning. And again, we can go in a number of different directions, but what happened last time is there was an inability to obtain a majority vote on either option. And so we're happy to support what this body wants to pursue, and we'll prepare as much data as we need to support
I
that.
think council needs to feel comfortable and confident that if we went down that road, that we could support the expenses that are coming along with the program. I think that's probably the real.
In so that we'll get an opportunity to hear from the public that's here. Or
Yeah, Madam Chair, I was going to ask a procedural question. Thank you for raising that. I think it'd be good to have our input on these particular issues after we hear from the public.
I agree.
And my only other question is, do we ask questions about the ordinance now? So if all these members of the public might just want to talk about the ordinance, I'm sure, but when's the appropriate time to talk about that, I guess is the question.
Why don't we do public comment? and then we can put the ordinance questions in along these as a fourth matter. Is that okay with you? Okay. So if everyone's amenable to that, let's open up the floor to public comment. And Zendaya, do we have anyone who's registered, who's signed up, would like to speak this morning?
Yes, ma'am. We have Amy Bima.
Good morning.
Good morning. I am coming before you in a dual purpose. Your name, ma'am? Oh, I'm sorry, Amy Bima. And I'm coming before you for a dual purpose. I actually own a business in Caligny Plaza, but I'm also a longtime resident in North Forest Beach. And in my opinion, if we charge for parking in the Caligny area, it is going to force people to look for other options, A, Caligny Plaza, and also B, coming into my neighborhood. I'm at Dove Street, so I'm very close to the public beach parking. And we already have people parking up and down our streets because of the rental houses. And we try to be considerate and not call and have them towed and go and knock on doors and have them move those cars. But human nature is, I can park and pay, or I can find somewhere else to park. And we're very concerned because we already have parking issues in our Caligny area with people going to the beach. And I think someone proposed the question, how do you know what their intent is? We see it every day. They park, they open their trunk, they're grabbing their coolers, they're grabbing their beach chairs, and they're going to the beach, especially when the beach parking is full, and also times when it's not full because they're just going for the other options. And I think you'll hear from a lot of other people here today that we really do have a parking issue down in our area. And I'm amazed how many people come and say, I don't know where beach parking is. The signage is not very prominent, which I don't want a big sign, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to flash a big sign. But I feel like sometimes the rental agencies should give out more pamphlets explaining where beach parking is and is not. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes,
You
ma'am.
referred to the issues with folks parking, opening their trunk, taking their beach paraphernalia, et cetera. Is that what your observations are as a business owner?
Yes,
Or
ma'am.
as a business owner?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Carolyn Baltz.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Baltz. I've lived on Hilton Head for 40 years. I've lived in North Forest Beach for 31 years, and I've been a restaurant owner in both Caligny, and now I am in the old Bilo Center, Circle Center. I've been there, so combined for 25 years. I've owned a business on the island. I agree exactly with what Amy said. There is not enough parking, period. Every time, my biggest thing is every time there's an event, which I am not against anything, I support the rec center, truly everything they do, but whenever there's an event, even though we have security, our parking place is totally full. So I don't know, I've heard in the past couple days that, and it didn't come up at all, so I'm not sure, but I heard the town has acquired more land and they're thinking of putting more parking there. I don't know if that's an option, but it's just not beach parking, it's the event parking too, like you said for the symphony, and in the summertime, it's Tuesday nights, it's Thursday nights, sometimes it's the weekends that there's different things going on. So as a business owner, it's affecting us. You can come by like during Wine Fest and you don't have none of us have customers in our restaurant because of now all the food, the options to have food while they're there, besides just drinking, whatever. So it's affecting us. It's huge. And I don't want to go on and on because I'm sure everyone's going to say the same thing, but I don't think it's going to matter if you charge, if you charge or if you don't charge, there's no parking. There's just no availability for parking. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Jay Wendell.
Hi, Jay Wendell, Beach House Resort General Manager, Chairman of the Hilton Head Island Bluffton Chamber, and 12-year resident of Hilton Head Island Plantation. First and foremost, thank you, Ms. Becker and Mr. Brown, for taking time to speak with me regarding some of these issues. I ask that you all consider, when you're making your decision to push this forward, that you consider 5 different areas. First being residents. Youth activities, surfing, sailing, Island Rec Center, volleyball, all happens on that beach, and those are activities sponsored by Rec Center and Hilton Head Island volleyball, actually. Multi-car households. I myself have 3 registered vehicles in our house. So if my wife is at work, I'm at work, my son can't go to the beach. I think that's a challenge based on 2 available parking permits. Kids will find creative solutions. So Hilton Head Island Plantation, I'm sure my son will call his friends over and they'll all go to Pine Island, so they don't have to pay. Look forward to the parking signage. No parking signage in people's front yards in the Coligny area. Townhomes without gates in those communities, how are they going to man those? And who's parking in them, taking their parking spaces? 35% of cars parked at Coligny Center, Coligny parking, 35% were residents last year. That was up from 25% the year before, so we're going in the right direction. Visitors, added expense to an already cost-sensitive environment. What is the ROI on your vacation? What is the experience we're giving if we're adding for parking? Employees, just like every other city, this will be an added expense to them if they have to pay for parking. As a town, what have we done for employees in the last 10 years? It's a challenge finding great employees. Businesses and government should work together. Day trippers. Day trippers on average is a group of 5 people. Last year, $430 per day spent by day trippers. That was down 7.1% from 22. Businesses, Coligny Shopping Center, each parking space is worth $180,000 in revenue. If we take 100 employees and put them in that parking lot, that's $18 million in lost revenue. If 100 people decide to park in that parking lot instead of go to the paid parking, that's another $18 million. That's $36 million. If I'm off by 50%, it's still $18 million. But the data does not lie. I had a lot of other things to say, but I will actually leave some information for you all to read that came through some other sources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay.
Mr. Lucier, please.
Good morning. My name is Lee Lucier, longtime Island resident, local business owner, and CEO of the Richardson Group. Good morning, and thank you for undertaking this complex and island-wide issue, one that impacts so many island residents, local business owners, and their staff. I wanted today to give you actual 2024 data, since we haven't gotten it yet today. For South Carolina, grocery costs at the store are up 13.6%. Gas is up 10.1%. Property taxes, in most cases, are up 15%. Property insurance is up 31 to 180% on the island. Liability insurance is up 14 to 68%. Retail store sales in stores, in-person shopping as a state is down 6.8% just this year. Restaurant sales are down 14.3% just this year. Local labor costs is up 37% since 2020. Our visitors already pay sales tax, Beaufort County sales tax, green space tax, hospitality tax, in most cases, accommodations tax. Do we now need a parking tax? In closing, a yes vote today is a clear no for local businesses, which are all your constituents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jack Daly.
Good morning, Jack Daly. I live in South Forest Beach and for about 30 years, and I've had a business in Coligny for almost that long. So honestly, for those of us who have been here a long time, this is our third or fourth time around looking at this same issue. And honestly, the town is not ready to charge for parking at Caligny, right? There's things that we haven't done. We don't have the inventory. If you had the inventory, it's like having a lot of cards in your hand when you're playing a game. You got more to choose from, you can arrange them, you can come up with better options. It's a better way to go. We're not ready with that. And plus, we haven't chased down all the things that can go wrong. We haven't even examined all the extra expenses that go with this. There's a lot there. Even from the enforcement side of it, it's going to be a lot of more expenses. Do we even have a court to enforce all these tickets and fines? So this is the Public Safety Committee. It's not the committee for reckless endangerment, right? And I define that as culpable disregard of foreseeable consequences. Well, if you've been here long enough, or if you've lived in the neighborhood, these are very foreseeable things, that people avoid parking. You're going to impact businesses in a number of ways you haven't even counted yet. You're going to hurt the nice park we just put down there. And the cost, you're not going to make money on this plan. It's just the costs are going to grow and grow and grow, and it didn't work the last time with the same setup. So what I'm saying is we're not ready. We need the inventory. We need to study. And the town cannot recklessly endanger that neighborhood and those businesses by saying, you know what, we're going to do this, and the rest is on you. That's just not fair, because every step of this way, the town has given waivers to businesses when they pointed to the free beach parking and said, that's part of my parking plan. When I was on Forest Beach, we said, you don't have enough parking. But they said, no, right there. The town's like, yep, I approved. So I don't know if that legally contracts the town to continue providing free parking for those businesses. I'm not a lawyer. And special zoning, walking districts. So the town's complicit in this, and it took a long time to get to this mess. And we're not ready just to jump right out of it or move on or pass something and ignore all those foreseeable consequences. We're just not there yet. Maybe one day we will be. Maybe one day we'll have the provable inventory in the town's hand to discuss these things properly. But we're not there yet, so I think you should continue to study, continue to reach out to us. Staff really hasn't reached out to me as a merchant about it or a resident. And let's do our homework first and not be reckless. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Anyone else?
Lastly, David Peck.
Hey there, how are y'all today? Today is my first town council meeting. I'm David Peck, by the way. I'm a 50-year Island resident here, and I own a couple of businesses. I've been in the restaurant business now for about 25 years here. But anyway, I wasn't planning on really speaking today. It's generally my policy not to say anything out loud, because sometimes that comes back. But after listening, I felt it was important to at least come up with some thoughts and ideas that I had. Excuse me. The main issue that we've obviously been facing down in that area is just not enough parking, and the solution is more parking, in my opinion. We've had people we've hired our own security guards, et cetera, to try and manage our parking. It's never good business when any of your employees have to confront guests and tell them they can't park, they're going to be towed, et cetera. The solution is really, it's just more parking. Each year on Hilton Head, since COVID, we've had great years. COVID years being our greatest, up to our most recent years where we've seen a decline in business. This year being significantly lower than previous years past. That combined with an election year, a slower economy, have all contributed to the lower numbers, in my opinion. I didn't see any 2024 numbers for your proposal today, unless I missed them somewhere, so I don't feel like you could properly vote on that, considering 2024 has definitely been a slower year. I want to also point out that we own property down in the Keys, and they've also been in a similar situation with parking, beach parking, and both Smathers Beach and Higgs Beach and the Keys are all free parking. And I believe that's because they've already battled this and found that, it pushes people into the parking spaces of businesses, et cetera, that surround them. So I feel like that's, a little more research is needed to really find out, what's best before making a decision. I feel $5 an hour is too much. I feel like it's going to still push people into the free parking choices that they can find, which includes all of the surrounding businesses near the beach parking area. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes appearance by citizens.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and thank you all for your comments and for attending today. And bringing it back to the dais and the policy questions that we need to answer, as well as then discussing the ordinance itself. I'm just going to take, I'm going to go back to what I said. I'm going to try to stay within the categories and make my comments as we move along. I did want to say that some of your comments were very thought-provoking and interesting in a number of regards. So, again, thank you. Josh, first question you have for us is resident parking passes, A and B. Starting with A, thoughts on free for residents. Steve, would you like to start this time?
Yes, it should be free for residents. There needs to be some flexibility on households. I don't think the number should be unlimited, but I think there needs to be more flexibility.
Okay. We currently have 2. Do you have, and there's been a suggestion that some folks have 3 cars and drivers in their household. Do you have a suggestion on a number?
I think we need a top limit, but I think if there's a demonstration in the application as to how many residents there are with driver's licenses, possible.
I'm not sure that we would have access to DMV databases where we could tell you how many licensed drivers there are. I would say there would be some percentage, with having it 2 per household now, we're consistently seeing 7,000 passes per year. But that's also at $15 per pass. If you remove that fee, I would assume that you would see that increase somewhat when somebody doesn't have to pay for it. Why not go ahead and register for it? So I think that number will increase. What it will increase to, we couldn't tell you, but if we do decide to go forward, again, we have the ability to make amendments once we have more data about that. So if you wanted to go to 3, 4, whatever it is, once we put it in place, we could gather that information and report back to you.
I would be in favor of 3.
Okay. Alex?
I got a short answer, but I'm not quite sure.
Short answer.
Yeah, the short answer would be yes, free for residents. But I still have, I guess, a bit of curiosity. So Islanders Beach and Dreesen's Beach is where we have designated parking for residents at the moment.
Yes, sir.
And I'm real curious to understand that a little bit better as far as the demand over the entirety of the beach going season.
Yeah.
And so that makes it a little tough for me to tell you the limit for a household because I'm not understanding the demand piece.
Yeah, we see demand being very similar to the demand in other areas. The summer season, the warm months, that is when you see an uptick in the amount of parking. And with having 7,000 passes issued per year and about 150 spaces at Islander and another 25 at Dreesen, when you only have 175, those lots fill up. So particularly on the weekends, about 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, you'll start seeing it reach capacity, and then they're having to turn drivers away for the majority of the day until spaces open up and they can let more people in. So from that standpoint, it's very similar to what we see in the other areas, that it's seasonally influenced, and particularly the most in-demand times during weekends and holidays.
Okay. I'm not quite sure that I can give you an answer on the limit. Sorry.
So in thinking about that, the idea of changing behavior, right? So the idea of changing behavior, current versus how many more households have an additional opportunity to park for free, I don't necessarily, and anyone's willing, it's hypothetical, so I'm just saying it. I'm not sure necessarily by having an additional parking pass per household or 2, that it necessarily will change behavior, other than maybe Pine Island might get used more often. But in any case, that is just a comment, and I don't want to speak before the rest of my committee members, so Patsy?
Sure. I give a simple answer, yes, free for residents, limit per household at 2, because we have currently, I think it's 1,101 spaces. So if we give each household 3 spaces, we pretty much fill up the 1,101 quickly. And I want to encourage carpooling. I think the fewer cars, the better. Thank you.
Okay, and with regard to this, my very strong opinion, which has been part of this conversation since we started having it many years ago, is that absolutely free for residents. I always find it amazing that we have residents here who this is their home, and they pay a variety of different taxes, including their property taxes, and then yet have to go and pay an additional, even if it's $15 for a parking pass, where instead we allow visitors to come and park for free. And so absolutely, I will not approve it without free for residents. And limit per household, I do hear your position, Patsy, with regard to 2. If we have 1,100 parking spaces, we already sell 7,000 parking passes. Again, changing behavior, I don't think is going to be dramatically impacted by allowing more parking passes. We already are 7 times more than we could allow. So I'm not opposed to increasing the limit per household, and I'll go along with Councilman Alfred here and say 3 for the time being for discussion. Moving on to establish parking rates.
Does that give you guidance? You could use 2.5 per household?
It does, and ultimately what we're leading to, what's before you today is a draft resolution that if the committee can come to a consensus, we would send to town council to then be taken up along with the ordinance that was already moved out of this committee. And so a copy that was in there, what we're doing is essentially looking at the details from within this resolution, and depending upon your responses today, we would make sure that this document reflects those responses.
And while I have an opportunity, with regard to parking, I heard the discussion about the community impact and the potential for having no parking, which I think most of our communities have no street parking as it stands currently. But I also do appreciate the fact that when you have people over, you need additional places to park, and that's a deviation from that. There's also a caveat that we all have to stay very well aware of, and it was, Amy, I believe you brought it up, and it's true. With these beach areas being also high occupancy rental areas, and the problem with folks who come with too many cars and ultimately violate so many rules, including the no street parking rules, we need a better solution for that. And so I'm hoping that that part of it will come up as we start talking more about short-term rentals and parking, and that conversation about how to manage special events that residents are having doesn't get conflicted with trying to restrict on-street parking because of an overflow of cars with a high occupancy rental. So I hope that made sense to you. To my mind, it's 2 different things, but it still has the same solution. We just have to make sure the solution fits both scenarios. Okay. Establish parking rates. Alex, would you like to go first this time? Number of points under number 2.
Sure. I think I've stated very clearly that as far as the locations are concerned, I'm not in favor of us charging for parking in the Coligny business area. There's a huge competing interest there, in my opinion. All of the items that we have listed as far as potential expenditures to be more subsidized than they currently are. The business community is already picking up the tab on that, okay? So I think that until we get things sorted out as far as the mitigation strategy, I'm completely opposed to charging for parking at the Coligny location. The other locations, they don't have as significant of a business impact, so I'm okay with that. Timing, being that there's not a significant difference there as far as what would be generated, either seasonal or year-round. You know, I could support the seasonal, because I think that is sort of the high time that we're trying to be more organized versus year-round. The hours of operation, you know, right now, I think you're proposing 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. It's really going to depend on our target market, I think, okay? I think that's sun up to sundown in most cases, okay? So I can live with that for now, but I'd like to be able to study that again once we start to bring in more data, all right? And as far as the hourly rate is concerned, I'm glad you got a question mark there, because I do as well. You know, the proposed $5 amount everywhere with this, I'm going to describe it as a very generous profit margin. Yeah, I'm not comfortable with that. Again, I'd like to see us be a little bit more revenue neutral, and then increase according to the mitigation strategy that we're putting in place. And let's face it, parking is a premium on Hilton Head. And if we're going down the road of some alternate means of moving people around through parking rights and that sort of thing, I think then we have the opportunity to have a discussion about a parking rate that could support that. But what we're doing now today is not necessarily a strain on our budget, with the exception of what we've entered with this parking program. All the other stuff that we have around beach operations, we're currently paying for them. So to me, the hourly rate needs to deal more so with the new expenditure that is in front of us.
Thank you, Alex. And on the last point, I just need some clarification. Maybe it'll help others as well. When we talk about the profit margin, are we thinking also about all of the extended expenses, like Josh mentioned, the restroom facilities and the garbage and the beach management, and those that we take out of ATAX funds and other places? And I bring it up because we have to make sure that we're including, in my mind at least, all of those expenses as part of what could be, and honestly for me, should be covered here. That then allows for some ATAX funds to be freed up. And as others have mentioned with regard to economy and revenues down, there's a number of factors that play into that. But one that we can't discount is the fact that we are in a high inflation, low revenue situation here. And that's unlikely in the near term to be solved. And because of that, our ATAX, HTAC collections will be down. And if we want to be able to continue to allow for all of the grants, affiliated agencies, et cetera, that we generously as a town work together with the private community to facilitate, then we're going to have to understand that if this is a resource to take care of the beach and the parking, beach parking facilities, we free up some of those ATAX funds that otherwise will be cut later when, likely, possibly, cut later when we're talking ATAX. So I think there's a balancing there when we look at the profit margin in this. And if that doesn't make any sense to anyone, please correct me, and I'm always ears and willing to listen. And Betsy, did you want to, if you could pull up the questions though, so we can stay focused, unless, Josh, there was something you wanted to highlight there.
Nope, just
Okay,
providing that
Okay.
as examples.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. First of all, with regard to established parking rate location, I say everywhere. I've always been concerned about Cligney. I used to live there, as many people know. There is a balance there, but when you hear the rest of my recommendations, I think you'll understand. I think that, especially after seeing what happened this summer, maybe it was only Memorial Day where we had most evidence, but I was there after Memorial Day, and we need to protect that area. And I do believe the only way we can protect it is by charging a rate at the Cligney Beach parking area. So I'm not going with select locations. Timing, I'm with seasonal, and I'm with the two seasonal, if you will. There's the seasonal of, in the draft resolution is May 1 till September 30, but then there's the other seasonal at Chaplin.
Yeah.
So there's two seasonal
And the
provisions.
seasonal applicant, based upon kind of the information that we're seeing from occupancy rates and volume, it would be March 1st until September 30th. So before Memorial Day and just after Labor Day.
Okay. Then hours of operation, I'm okay with the staff recommendation of 7 to 7. And then with regard to the hourly rate, in lieu of the staff recommendation of $5, I would say $3 per hour. That seems to be more in line with the averages of other places. I appreciate Mr. Brown's comments about, making some profit. I don't think that's appropriate. I think we need to keep it closer to our cost, but I'm not sure all of those costs are reflected. I mean, they are reflected in the information you provided, but in thinking about, if we just talk about the cost of what we're paying PCI or for the equipment, then we have not included those other costs, cleaning it up, taking care of the space itself, other kinds of enforcement. And I think that those costs need to be reflected as well in the hourly rate. Then the other question that I have is with regard to the hourly rate. I'm proposing the $3. I think that changes the maximum rate because just looking at if you spend 4 hours at $3, that's $12. And then if you spend 6 hours at $3, that's $18. So perhaps the maximum ought to be something like $15 instead of the $30. And then the other question I have for my colleagues, and the reason I asked the question about weekend rates, is that we do have a lot of day trippers on the weekends. I appreciate Mr. Wendell's costs that he gave us, or the expenditures he gave us for day trippers. But I think we're going to see more and more of that impact, and I'm very concerned about the impact on our beaches and on our property from the volume that we're going to have. And so I would propose, in addition to those rate numbers, that we have a flat fee for weekend rate at Cligney. And in looking at just suggested numbers for my colleagues, if you spend 4 hours at $5 an hour, that's $20. So perhaps a flat fee of $20 at Cligney on the weekends during those peak summer months.
Any follow-up from anyone else before I, okay, so, yes? Yep. You haven't commented yet? Oh, boy. I'm telling you, I have been like trying to zip through this from the start, didn't I? Go ahead, I'm sorry, Steve.
On established parking rates, in terms of location, I am essentially in favor of everywhere, but I am very concerned that we need to deal with customers, as mentioned earlier, and that some approach to that has to be worked out. I think to leave Cligney out is going to cause more cars to go to Cligney and less to the other beaches, and that would not be an advantage. I am in favor of seasonal. I also believe that we should have a higher rate for Saturdays and Sundays in July and August. I don't have a particular problem with $5. but I don't want to see a profit out of this operation. And if adding in an additional charge for Saturdays and Sundays may mean that we could reduce the $5. Hours of operation are fine.
Apologize again.
Give me a chance.
Sorry, I apologize again. So the location has to be everywhere because Councilman Alford is correct. It will push more traffic down into Coligny. And we've already heard from businesses and residents that will just make the issues that they currently have and have had for quite some time worse. So parking everywhere, from my perspective. The timing seasonal, I think, is reasonable. I do hear, and Jay has left, he mentioned that the idea that Island Rec has course offerings down by the beach house there, on the beach, sailing, surfing, that sort of thing. And I think there are accommodations that could be made for that. For instance, through Island Rec, if you register and that's where you're going, that you get a waiver for those parking, those hours that you're attending those classes, would be a fair way to manage that in my mind. Hours of operation, I'm okay with a 7 to 7. I was going to suggest reducing 7 to 5 or 6, and the only reason being is it then does provide that late evening opportunity to those employees to be able to come in and park closer to where their jobs are, so that issue now has another way of being resolved for those particular employees. With regard to the hourly rate, I am fine with the hourly rate at $5 an hour and $30 as a max. The only thing that I would suggest as an alternative and perhaps as a compromise would be a flat fee, 7 days a week of $5 for the day. If you're thinking that it's 3.5 average hours spent, the math works out. But I'm perfectly happy with the way that it's been written in the statute. One of the things that keeps coming up is the idea of profit. I made my one statement, but I also want to make sure that we've also thought of the enforcement aspect of this. We are going to have to be far more persuasive through our enforcement to get folks to understand that they are not allowed to park in residential community areas and other creative parking ideas that they may come up with, which means there will be more expense in code enforcement and others out there writing tickets, telling people to move. And when we get to the ordinance, I think that we probably should be a little bit more strict. You can always come off of those levels, but we want to make sure that folks are paying attention and understand the consequences of their action. And once that message is clear and we've hopefully calm down any of that type of parking issue, we could always back off of it if necessary. But those are my thoughts on those subjects, matters that you have in front of us here. And we're going to go on to number 3. And Patsy, would you like to start first this time?
Sure. How to address this. Let me start with the bottom, the remote lot shuttle services. I think that's a no-go. The businesses have told us they don't think that's going to work based on the cost. I'd like to have shuttle services for all kind of activities and have less traffic because I don't think we have enough infrastructure total in Coligny. But right now, I can't see that happening. I can't see it being functional. Monthly passes, I would be okay with doing something like that. Dedicated spaces, I am not comfortable with using the Wild Wing property for that. For the reasons that based on the questions that I've asked, because I don't want it limited to employee parking. I'm okay. You know, if you look at, I think your data showed 146 businesses and 4 persons per business, although there may be some overlap. I don't know how that average works out. And I think it was 584 was the same number I had calculated. The spaces in there would be perhaps going from 80 to 120 to 160, so there's certainly not enough. But I think, you know, we could offer, and a lot of jurisdictions do this. If they have a parking garage and there's neighboring businesses, they offer a monthly fee for those businesses, but they don't fill up the parking garage. So, you know, I would say that, you know, and I don't know what the number is. You know, I don't want to use all the Wild Wing property for employee parking, bottom line on that one. I don't know what number to recommend for dedicated spaces. You know, if that property, if Wild Wing, I'm just going to use Wild Wings for number purposes. So if it goes from 80 to 160, then do we have some extra spaces in there? Do we have 80 and 146 businesses? So they only get one pass. I understand that a lot of the employers have provided parking somewhere for their employees. And I think that's an employer-employee issue. And I'm not sure that the town should be in the business of providing employee parking. We're in the business of providing, taking care of our beaches. And in order to do that, and our communities, and in order to do that, having beach parking is a way to do that. It's not employee parking, is my thought. I'm sympathetic to that, but, you know, some sort of monthly pass program with a limited number of passes, and you know, they can park at Dreesen and shuttle in on Palmetto Breeze, I guess, I don't know. But, sorry, that's kind of my point, is that that's not our purpose. I didn't see in the purpose that we've outlined providing employee parking. I'm sensitive to the number of businesses in the area, but I'll go back to that parking garage model. If you build a parking garage and there's area businesses and they want to purchase a monthly pass, but there's a limited number, we're not filling up the parking garage. And so, I'm sorry, but I can't give a number, but that's the best information I can give.
I am in favor of using Wild Wings as a dedicated space. Don't have any particular opinion on monthly passes. I don't know whether that's feasible or as a practical matter. And I am in favor of shuttle services to the extent we have USCB parking lot and perhaps others available.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, first of all, I wanted to sort of maybe try to clean up my use of the word profit. What I'm really asking us to do is to take, as we are, a very holistic approach to this, but to look at it from a different lens. I wholeheartedly agree that we need to be thinking about the future growth, the future pressures that are going to be put on our public facilities, okay? I'm not discounting that to any degree. The point that I'm making is, with the exception of this new program, we're already paying for that. We're already paying for that. And the majority of those dollars are coming from revenues that are produced by our visitor, okay? I mean, I don't want us to lose sight of that, all right? And the level of service that we are providing to our customers is important. And the residents, to a large degree, that are parking in particularly the business areas down there, are not providing that. They're enjoying the beach just like the visitor. So I have grave concern about those that are providing a level of service for our visitor. And if we don't have that, then we will continue to see a decline in the revenues that we are enjoying at the moment from other revenue sources. Okay, so yes, we need to have a keen focus on our resident, but I think we need to be also keenly focused on how we provide that level of service for our visitors. Now, with that being said, I am in favor of dedicated spaces. I think I've mentioned this in the past. Sea Pines has launched a employee shuttle program. It has freed up a lot of parking in the Harbortown area where we all know parking is limited. We have the same situation here. Parking is limited in the Caligny area and all of the other beaches. So to me, we need to be more than serious about having some type of shuttle service provided so that we can continue to have that grade A level of service for our visitor. Monthly passes, I think that's out.
All right, and thank you for your comments. Residents, in my mind, are always going to come first. I am sensitive and understand the businesses who have expressed their concerns. Their concerns that they are expressing are current. These problems exist today. And a whole lot of what we hope to solve for the future is not making today's problems worse. And so I see the upside to the paid parking in Caligny that will help. You know, a lot of, and maybe this is anecdotal, but a lot of the increased pressures down there started to come when Tybee, for instance, started to charge. And we got a new influx of day trippers and visitors to the island. One of the reasons I wanted a survey was to be able to identify of the, and I have 584 down here, so of that number, how many, A, are residents on the island who are going to get a free parking pass anyway? How many of them, and there are various shifts that they work, that would be interesting information. And then how many of them are coming off, from off island to work here? Those would have been interesting numbers for me to have so that we could start to narrow down on what type of problem, real problem we have. We don't have necessarily all that information. I'm hoping that we can collect that information and have a better idea, because once implemented, there's always an opportunity to come back with new information and experience to adjust so that we're providing the best service for our residents and for our visitors, the business owners and their customers. I am not interested and will not support dedicated spaces. And Wild Wings was not purchased at the $4 million price tag, plus the reconstruction of that for parking so that we could hand it back over and just save it. We have other issues that exist today down there, event parking and the like, and currently not enough parking for customers and visitors and employees. So dedicating spaces, I agree with Patsy 100% on that. How we resolve the issue, though, in fairness, I would have a discussion about, and it would be important to have those numbers I was just discussing of the 584, how many people this really impacts, and allowing businesses to, at a discounted rate, buy a pass for their employees that it's applicable to, right? It may be if you have 10 employees, it really only affects one of your employees. So I would be interested in that conversation about employers' ability to buy a discounted pass for an employee. Short of that, dedicated spaces is a no. The remote lot and shuttle services, the businesses have expressed that they're not interested in it as a starting point. So, and I think a lot of their concerns really become less of a struggle when you think about the hours that they're mostly concerned about when the parking over at the beach park becomes free anyway. Thus my reasoning for wanting to reduce it from 6 to a lower number for that late shift employee. So those are my thoughts on all of those. And I'm just looking to make sure. I had a question when you were talking generally about the gates. So the gates continue to operate 24 hours a day, correct?
Yeah, now the gates are there primarily for access, controlling entrance into and out of. So when the park's open, gates are up. When the park's closed, gates are down. The system for enforcing parking is the license plate registration system.
So my question about that is, if you were going in the evening to Celebration Park, not because of a special event, but because you wanted to go to Celebration Park and have a picnic with your grandkids, I don't know, come up with any reason you want. Would you be able to get in, to be able to use the park?
Up until the hour that the park's closed, and then the gate would
So
not
then-
open.
So then essentially we're closing Celebration Park at 7 o'clock too.
No. So the hours of operation of the park would be 6 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Okay.
Paid parking would be implemented from 7 a.m. to 7
So
p.m.
the gate would
Yes.
still open and
Correct. The gate would still
close
open until 10 p.m.
regardless?
At 10 p.m., it would no longer allow access because at that point, the park
The
is
park is
closed.
closed. Okay, so that was my question. So the gate continues to open after that 7 o'clock up to 10 o'clock when the parks are
Correct.
closed anyway? Perfect, that's fine. Thank you for answering my question on that. There is and it goes to enforcement and probably may or not really be appropriate to this conversation, but I'm hearing that down by Alders Lane, that there are concerns with folks using golf carts to get to the beach and then leaving their golf carts along the pathway. Is that part of this discussion? We need to resolve that issue. Because that shouldn't be
Yeah, so
happening.
we only allow parking in dedicated parking spaces, and at Alder Lane, there are dedicated parking spaces that are currently metered, but those are all on the other side of the street,
Right,
and
it's
there's
not
about
going.
22, 25 of them, something like that.
But it's on the beach path, as I'm
Yeah,
understanding.
that's not a dedicated parking spot, and therefore would be illegal parking.
Okay, so not part of this discussion, I get that, but I do want a note made that we need to resolve that issue for that area. And what else do I have on here that I was going to throw in before we jump? I think that most of my questions have been answered. I made my positions clear. Any follow-up before we move on?
Yeah, I just want to get some clarity on the conversation around dedicated spaces. If the town is now experiencing another revenue source and other properties become available for us to purchase for parking, are we saying that we are writing policy that we will never dedicate spaces to anything outside of it being paid for parking?
I would say no, sir. That's always going to be a question for town council from a policy standpoint. When you
Okay.
own and control the property, you get to set how it's used.
Okay, I'm just responding to some of the comments that I've heard about the Wild Wing spot, and, I get it, it was a big expense, okay? But at the same time, I'm going back to my earlier points, we have to realize that we have to take care of the business community in certain areas of this island. And as far as the times are concerned, Madam Chair, retail, restaurants, they all have varying hours of operation, obviously. But for the most part, if you're running 8-hour shifts, there's not an 8-hour shift that's going to start at 6 or 7 p.m. unless they're working an overnight shift. It's normally a 12-hour shift at that point. So the majority of the evening hour employees that are going to be coming in are either working a 1 to 9, a 2 to 10, or a 3 to 11. Okay, so when we look at these hours of operations, I'm not quite sure that you can back it up far enough to cover what we're trying to accomplish with being accommodating to our employees.
Does that include the thought of, for those, which the businesses are far better positioned to be able to identify and know the numbers that it impacts, in allowing them to buy a discounted parking pass where they could park anywhere where there's a parking spot available to them?
Yeah, well, I'm making a very, very big assumption here. But the reason that you haven't gotten any traction around the shuttle service and the discount is because it is now another burden on the employer and the employees, okay? There has to be some incentives for programs like this to work. That's the bottom line. And so, no, I don't think that there's going to be much temperature around, discounted passes for folks to offer their employees. And I'm speaking from a space that I have experienced for a very long time, okay? It is very challenging to hire people here on Hilton Head. That's why our conversation around affordable housing is so loud. Just creating spaces to attract employees on Hilton Head is something of grave significance, okay? And going in the other direction just makes that more difficult for folks that are trying to hire folks on Hilton Head. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you. And I think part of the incentive is the negotiation and the back and forth here in terms of trying to offer something that we don't necessarily need to have to offer. So there has been some give and take with regard to that. If that negotiation in the future needs to continue, then that's a conversation that can always be had. But I don't want it to be left that the town isn't doing enough for the businesses and their employees. I think that offering that opportunity is a give and take and a partnership with the businesses. So, and we'll see how it works, and we can always adjust at a later time. So having said that, the ordinance.
There, oops, sorry, there we go. One quick thing on the draft resolution about parking fees, before we make a decision about all the amounts, et cetera. Section 3 refers to residents as identified in section 12-5-516. I'd asked this question before. When I looked at the code provision, residents are defined in section 12-5-512. And we were going to check that reference. But I looked at it again, and I do believe that's the wrong section.
Okay, we'll confirm that citation.
I think that's all I had, other than whatever we're going to fill in on with regard to the proposed language and what we would recommend adoption.
And other than the notation, all of the definition under there is correct. You were comfortable with the definition?
And the definition of resident under the existing ordinance, which we're going to carry on. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, good. And the ordinance.
Yes, so let me kind of try to summarize where I think we are and where we might be able to go. So through your feedback today, I think there's a number of areas where there is consensus from this body. One of which is that resident beach parking passes should be made free, that there'd be consensus to charge for paid parking everywhere, that it be seasonal in basis and operate from a paid parking time of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Where we still would need some guidance is on the number of passes that could be issued per household, the rate that would be charged, and we kind of have a floor and we kind of have a ceiling. So somewhere between a true break even and somewhere between a $5 an hour, $30 a day, and maybe somewhere in between that. And then the last one, the employee parking, kind of evenly split between preferring a monthly parking pass, a discounted pass solution versus provided dedicated parking spaces. For purposes of moving this discussion out of committee, what I would propose is focus on a motion that would adopt or incorporate those items that the committee's kind of reached consensus on, and leave the discussion of those other items to the full body of council so that we can engage with all council members, get their additional feedback, and see where that might lead the conversation.
So while I agree with you on almost everything, I think there was a consensus. I do think that we had the parking fee, there were three of us who were fine with the way it's been written with $5 and the 30. I believe Mr. Alford and Mr. Brown and I agreed on that. Is that correct? No, you did not agree?
Yeah, so Mr. Brown was break even.
Break even. But the break-even point is the one that makes it a difficult conversation because we haven't, or perhaps identified all the areas other than what your spreadsheet has, but those additional areas that I hope I pointed out a number of them that also are beach parking related. And I think that those should be included in that break-even amount. So if we were looking at it in those, in that vision, then it's a different conversation.
Well, let me help you. I'm not in favor of this.
Help, I understand what I'm saying, and I'm
No, I'm saying help the
presenting, but thank
conversation
you.
as far as where we are with consensus. I am not in favor of $5 per hour.
You're not.
You're not.
Well, in terms
What's the
of,
fee that you would be acceptable? Patsy presented, I think it was $3.
$3 per hour with a maximum of $15 per day.
terms of consensus for limit per household, I'll make it easier and I'll go back to 2.
Okay.
Okay, so we're good with that one. And Alex, how do you feel about Patsy's suggestion of 3 and 15? I know I had presented that 2025 is, and have it not hourly, just a daily pass, a daily fee. You come in and you're at 25. How do you feel about that?
I'm not prepared to give you a per hour amount without the mitigation strategy assigned to it. So we are enacting policy that leaves out a point that we said we were going to work on. So with that being said, I'm not going to be able to support this moving forward.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, then just in general. Okay. And the mitigation policy, Alex, that we've discussed with regard to no option to a discounted rate for businesses.
So again, I'm in lines of some type of incentive for
Can you describe an
customer
incentive?
or, sure, absolutely. If there was a remote lot with dedicated spaces that we could offer to our businesses for the employee parking free, then to me, that is an incentive
Okay. And that's the only incentive you're interested in?
at this point, yes.
Okay.
So, Mr. Brown, you're talking about a remote lot, not Calignia, not Wild Wings, so USCB?
If there's adequate transportation, then I think that's a discussion that we are able to have with the business community. As I mentioned earlier, it works in Harbortown, okay? We've got probably 95% compliance. And it's because we understand that if we free up those parking spaces, that will generate more revenues for us down the road.
How many parking spaces are available and what are our options at USCB?
I don't know that information off the top of my head. I can tell you the overflow that's used for now, we've not reached capacity with the beach shuttle service that operates from there. Not to say that it wouldn't then be greater utilized if we dedicated it for employee parking, but we can get you an idea of what the number of spaces are. That lot does take some coordination with USCB. We essentially use it when they don't have students there on the weekends. If we were to use it during the week, that might be a little bit more problematic. Certainly during the summer seasons, we've got additional properties that we could consider, one of the ones being Crossings Park. It's not utilized outside of the baseball season, and so there is additional capacity there that we could run a shuttle service from. So there are options there if that is what the recommendation of council to move forward with is. And so if there's consensus there, we can get you some more information to kind of articulate what that capacity looks like.
With Crossings,
Go ahead.
with Crossings, it's my expectation with the money, if the new builds and the new attractions there, that it'll be more, it'll be used more. I would hate to start burdening our parks with a parking for employees. And that's even more remote than I think what they had initially were thinking of, which was likely to be USCB or somewhere closer by. So I would not be in favor of using our parks in that space at all. The other thing is, and I'll go back to what Patsy said, and I hate this, and I've tried to find a compromise, but I do agree it is not the government or the town's responsibilities to take the step of providing a free off-site parking space for businesses' employees. And I've looked for a compromise, and I'm willing to make a compromise, but I am not going to be able to justify to myself nor the residents of this island that we are spending millions of dollars to do that, especially when the need already today exists. So anyway.
Madam Chair, maybe I'm going to try to suggest a compromise here. Once we've gotten all these other elements lined out, I think we have a couple of nuances we need to finalize. But with regard to employee parking, the committee consider passing along to the full town council a recommendation to look at remote parking for employees with a shuttle service. And that would be our compromise recommendation to the full town council. Throwing that out as a compromise.
And then with regard to expenses, understanding that, as I heard it, I didn't write it down, 36,000 roughly, doing the math, of $60 an hour plus travel time or whatever the other caveat was in there, that those are now additional expenses as well, and that it doesn't extend because of... Oh, my watch is talking to me. It doesn't extend late evenings, and there are hurdles, whether it's Palmetto Breeze or another carrier. Perhaps there's an entrepreneur on the island who wants to create a business, I don't know. But in any case, Patsy, I would agree to your compromise.
On another subject, Josh, what did you record as the consensus on July, August, Saturday, Sunday higher rate?
So there was no consensus in terms of rate. Again, we heard ranges on everything. Everybody was in agreement that it be imposed seasonally. So that would be March 1st to September 30th. But in terms of the rate and whether there's a premium paid on the weekends as compared to the weekdays, the responses have varied.
Well, and let's revisit this, because the point of spending all these hours here today, and hopefully we'll be concluding soon, is to give staff enough of information to be able to come to the full town council for us to be able to work through and approve. So what is the thought on a weekend basis? I'm fine with that idea.
And I think it's something I had suggested on Saturdays and Sundays, a flat rate of, I think I put out $20 because I was looking at the numbers of 4 hours at $5, thinking at $3 an hour during the week, and then 6 hours at $5 is $30. So I think I just put out there $20 as a flat rate on the weekends, but
That's a rate generally.
Mm-hmm.
You had a lower rate, 5, you were starting with 3 and a max that's lower.
yes.
This is only for July, August, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah, so my proposal was $3 per hour with a maximum of $15, plus on the weekends and a peak time of $20 flat fee. So you don't pay per hourly, you pay a flat fee to
Seems
park
to me the
there.
question is, what is the increment? We're not addressing whether it's $5. We're addressing increment on Saturday, Sunday, July, August.
Yeah, yes, and so what I'm saying is that that's at $5 an hour. So if you go to $3 an hour, then with a maximum of 15, but on the weekends would be 20. So that's what I'm talking about. Now, if the consensus is $5 an hour, and I think we have 2 at $5 an hour, and 1 at $3, and 1 is break even. as I understand it. Then we don't really have a consensus on the $5 per hour. But if it's $5 per hour, then the flat fee weekend rate has to be higher.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a flat fee of $30.
I like the flat fee at $30, but I do want to caution us, we do not want to be, Tybee is no limit. Correct me if I got that.
$4 per hour, no
$4 per
max.
hour, period, no limit. And I personally do not want to go out with our parking program at a lower amount than Tybee started. Lowest I would go is $4, but I really think we ought to stick with the 5. And the $30. I do understand your point, and you've mentioned, Stephen, I'm wondering if you have a specific July and August. Why not include June?
Because my thought was based on the statistics that were presented, that July and August are the peak months. If June is in the same category, then we need to change it.
It is. That was just the period that they had started collecting that data. Mhm. Okay. If I could suggest this, we have the ability to craft several alternatives to then incorporate in the resolution. So it would be, 5A, 5B, 5C, which tries to take these options, articulate them, and then put them in a single document that we can then move forward, and then council can review all 3 of those options and see if we can find one that has majority support.
I just want to make sure
Overall or on specific?
specific. Well, are we finished with all of the ones that?
I was going to say, yeah, with the exception of several options for the rates, we have guidance on all the other areas that we will build into the draft resolution.
Let me go
Before
back.
we leave that last topic, Steve, I just want to make sure that I was clearly heard. I do not want to be lower than Tybee.
Before we leave on a location everywhere, I am still very concerned about the impact on customers, and I understand that at the moment, the staff preference is to leave this to the employers and owners to figure out on their own. Seems to me that a leading solution to this is to have the employers participate in a paid parking plan that parallels what the town is doing. Very least, I'd like to know whether that's at least feasible and can be suggested to the employers.
I would tell you it absolutely is feasible. Again, with the flexibility of this program, we can craft a number of different solutions. But the Coligny business owners have been clear and consistent that they do not want the imposition of paid parking at all. So I think until we get to the point that the town has actually expressed that they will in fact impose paid parking, their preferred option is going to be to say, we don't want it at all, not let's figure out a solution for our property as well.
And we
I
can't
think
make
that's a
them.
good negotiating position. I'm sure that that's how they feel, but I'm not sure that's best for the town, and therefore I think we need to push a little harder on the next round on that.
We can absolutely commit that we are willing to sit down with them and help to craft solutions. Again, part of the difficulty is and will remain understanding the intent of somebody when they pull into that parking lot and what they plan on doing.
So if we leave it up to the employers, they decide intent on their own, and if they want to give credits to customers who buy $100 or just look around.
That is very much the
be up to
system that,
them.
yeah, that's very much the system that we could assist with.
Looking at our tech.
There it
Oh,
goes, there it
It's
goes.
back on. Okay. I'll try to talk fast. If you're talking about some sort of voucher system, we can't make employers do it. And I'm not sure how we can facilitate that happening. We can suggest a system. I'm familiar, I think, as you are, with a voucher system, whereas you said, you go in and there was a place in downtown Asheville called Tops for Shoes. You go in and you buy a pair of shoes, they'll stamp your vouchers. And so you get free parking. But that's up to the employers, because they're paying something extra, I guess, to be able to have that voucher system. Because they're then paying for it. Somebody's paying for the parking. So we can't make folks do that, but I think it's something for us to put off in the future to think about, if the merchants would be willing to talk about it.
My point is that I want to know if it's feasible and practical as an approach for the employers to use. We may not be able to force it on them, but it could provide a result that would be satisfactory if they did, and if they choose not to, that's their problem. So I don't want to put it off. I think this is something we need to begin exploring right now and essentially suggest it.
Yeah.
How do you craft such a motion?
Pardon?
How do you craft such a motion? I don't think you
know.
can.
But I can tell you, if they're willing to undertake managed parking, there are solutions for them that they can implement.
And I would just to Pat's point, like, there's 2 points that I just want to add in here. We talked about USCD as a remote lot shuttle service opportunity, but on the weekends, I think in the past, we've also talked to the local churches and other places that are available. So those opportunities, whoops, I'm getting.
Yeah, I would tell you, so we had a number of conversations early on with some of the churches and other similarly related businesses around the Pope Avenue corridor, looking to create additional capacity on the weekends, and universally, all of them said no, either because they've got existing programming that goes on in the weekends that they don't want to impair or impact, or two, the liability from offering the paid parking on their property was something that they weren't willing to undertake.
Oh, yeah, no, I wasn't referring to paid parking on their facility, but in terms of being able to offer employee options. Okay, so that's fine. And then the other thing is, I think those are great conversations that should be had. I don't know who leads those, but I don't think they go into our motion with regard to the business. That is for the site owner and the individual businesses to work together, just as they have already in establishing their own security systems such that they have them for parking and what their next steps are. But that's a private issue versus a public issue. And we have a great mayor and town manager and wonderful representatives who can certainly have those conversations as side conversations, but I don't want to see it come into our motion that that's going to be part of our responsibility as a government.
I want to just try to take Mr. Alfred's thought a bit further. And I'm not recommending that it needs to be in this motion, but you have to understand, if we're setting a flat rate for weekend visitors, I'm just going to use this number at $20, and then you're then going to a merchant and saying, can you offer some type of voucher to absorb that cost? Well, it is very dependent upon the policy decision that we make here today. So I think it is a conversation that's worth having, and not that we're going to set policy around what they're saying, but I think we need to take it into consideration. $20, what business is going to voucher that? At what particular rate are they going to voucher it at, right? So this all intertwines. I don't think that we can discount that the conversation is needed in order for you to make a solid decision, that's all.
What's motivating, sitting around in my head, doesn't have to be part of the motion, but I do want to know if it's feasible and that we're not just.
The answer is yes, it is
whistling in the
absolutely
dark.
feasible.
But it seems to me that this is potentially a worthwhile operation for employers to engage in because they get revenue for any beach parker who wants to park on their space.
Yes, if they're willing to have those conversations, we can absolutely help them craft a solution. I would just tell you, up until this point in time, they've been consistent in saying they do not want paid parking at all, let alone on their property or the town's. But if they wanted to have that conversation, we can absolutely work with them to help create a solution. Because again, if you look at many other beach communities, you can have commercial activities and paid parking, and both seem to be okay. So there are solutions that are there. We just have to figure out which one works best.
But it seems to me it's an added point if it's their, if it's their paid parking program, they're gonna make money on it from the beach parkers.
I think that's a reasonable argument, and I think that the businesses should consider that as an opportunity for themselves. But I also want to make sure that, Alex, if it's $20, say, and then you're looking for a business to provide a voucher back to cover that cost, it doesn't have to be necessary. And again, these are their decisions to make, not our decisions. We can certainly facilitate the conversation. Our staff's amazing. But it could be something else. It could be, if your fee to park was $20, but, we're going to give you a $10 voucher. I'm making up numbers, so whatever those are. But that's the business side, the private side of having those discussions and making those determinations.
I understand.
Okay.
I think that we're pulling numbers out of there regardless, is where I'm going. Because we're taking into consideration other communities that have beach parking programs, and we're pulling from that as a condition. And what I'm saying is our condition may very well be very different from theirs. And the business community, I think, has a part to play in that condition. And we're not taking that into consideration. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you. Patsy, did you have a comment?
Well, I was just going to think about it, see Mr. Daly sitting there, great seller of ice cream. I see another merchant at Piggly Wiggly now. I'd probably spend more than $20 when I go to Piggly Wiggly per person. I don't maybe spend $20 per ice cream cone. But if I'm selling somebody, let's say it's a family of four, and I'm selling each one an ice cream cone at $5 each, that's $20. And now you just might use my voucher and I get nothing. So anyhow, that's why I think we need to look at it at a separate time. We don't have enough data. As Mr. Brown said, we're pulling numbers out of the air. I can't remember how much ice cream costs, but I do know good ice cream is worth it. So at any rate, I think we need to set that aside for future discussion.
Okay. So where are we on the ordinance? Patsy, did you get all your questions answered that you had, that you wanted to?
On the resolution, but not on the ordinance.
Okay,
Yeah.
then would you
I'll
wish to move on to the
There are
ordinance?
just a couple of them here. So let's see. Pardon me while I flip through the page. And I know we've been through this before. There's a couple things that,
My apologies, before you start, can you pull up the ordinance for us so that it's in front of us?
yeah,
Thank you.
okay. Yeah, my questions don't start until 12-3-118, which must be on the next page. Pick up where you left off, okay, I'll try. Yes, so I apologize if I didn't notice this before. This refers to a designated parking authority, and I don't know whether there's a statutory definition. I think I know we're talking about if we hire an outside contractor to do this. But I just wanted to make sure there's no state statute which we're running afoul of because now we've designated somebody as a parking authority.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. And again, this language, the majority of it is already existing in the code. What we're looking at is kind of making sure it's clear who has the authority to enforce it. And this goes in line within the administrative penalty system.
Sure.
And so, yes, it could be a person of PCI, it could be one of the town code enforcement officers, or in theory, it could be Beaufort County Sheriff's Officer.
Yeah, that part I understand. I'm just wondering if, like housing authority is a term of art. Is there something under the state statutes that refers to a parking authority? Okay, and some states do have that. Okay, thank you. Because otherwise I'd call it a parking agency. And then we've already talked about the definition of resident, which is in 12-5-12, which I think is on the next page of your draft. Yeah, there we go. So let's move from there over to the next page where it refers to resident beach pass, 12-5-516. Yeah, and so there we go. So here we, instead of using the term resident, we use the term issue resident beach parking passes to, and then the term is individuals who can prove primary residency. So it seems like it would be better to use the definition of resident alone Because now it says I have to prove primary residency, which someone may argue that's different from the definition.
Okay.
So I
So
would-
just going back to who's defined as resident is any person who owns
Yes.
any single or multifamily residence in the municipal limits, irrespective whether it's a 4% or 6% ratio, and anybody who's under a lease. So basically, you're a property owner on Hilton Head Island.
Right. And so there it clearly defines residence. So my suggestion is in 12-5-16, strike the phrase "to individuals who can prove primary residency" and to say "to residents" as defined in 12-5-512.
Okay.
And then in subsection B, now we're calling them qualified residents, which sounds like it's a different term. So
Again, you have to qualify as
Yes.
a
I-
resident
I
by
understand.
being a property owner.
I understand that, but if you just use the term residents as defined in 12-5-512 there, instead of creating a new term called qualified residents. It's fine. And the last thing in there is, it's the appeal process,
Okay.
which is towards the end. I don't know what I did with my page. Yes, appeals. And okay, yeah, it's subsection C. So there's 3 levels. You get administrative citation, you can appeal it to the designated parking authority, and then if you disagree with them, you go, I thought it was the town manager, now it's the town attorney.
That's correct.
And so that is a change from the earlier draft, and here's my question for the town attorney. I have no doubt about his judicial ability to review appeals, but if he is advising the staff about issuing a citation, how can he then be the appellate
So
authority?
he's not advising staff about issuing a citation. He's advising the
No.
parking authority, or it could be a code enforcement officer. However, let me tell you where this comes from.
Okay.
The town does not have its own municipal court. If we did, it would be going to the municipal judge, who
Right.
A, is an attorney, and B, is hired by town council. The town attorney is A, an attorney, and B, hired by town council. So, in our opinion, the town attorney is as close to a municipal judge ruling on the same set of circumstances. And in our system, that is what we would propose. However, if you want to change it, we can certainly change it to any other officer, but the rationale behind that is it is as close to a municipal judge as the town of Hilton Head has.
Okay, well, Madam Chair, I recommend the committee that we strike attorney from there and have
So
it to the, back to the town
procedurally, Ms.
manager.
Bryson, this matter's not before this committee. This matter's already been voted out to town council.
But
So what's before you on the agenda today is a consideration of a resolution setting the parking fee.
Yes, I
This was
understand that.
This was included for reference purposes, just to try to tie it back in. But this ordinance has actually not been noticed to be on the agenda for today.
Okay, all right. So, but won't it come before the town council?
It will, and we can absolutely make changes
I'll
then.
pass along my notes.
Yes,
How's
please.
that?
Thank you for that clarification, Josh. Right, so this had already gone, but it's been in limbo while we've been resolving these other issues. And that's where all of those questions and answers
It is.
can be more appropriate. Good. All right, well then, do we have a motion to move this resolution and information on so that it can be brought also along with the ordinance to town council for further review and decision?
Madam Chair, I move to recommend that the town council consider adoption of the draft resolution we've been provided with the following changes. Section 1 and 2 be combined, and that there be alternative provisions for the parking fee to be $5 per hour, with a maximum of $30 and a $30 flat fee for the months June through August at Coligny. And the subsection B, $3 per hour with a maximum daily of $20 and a $20 flat fee of June through August at Coligny. Subsection 3, that the definition of resident be clarified to the proper subsection, which I think we just looked at 12-5-512. The hours of operation be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Oh, sorry, I don't need to change subsection 4. I see that. I've done that in 5, I apologize. And that the dates for collection of parking fees include the seasonal recommendation for Chaplain Park. And that, yeah, so the seasonal one is section 6, not 6A. And further, in addition to the resolution as amended, recommend to the full town council consideration of an employee parking system which includes free parking at a remote site and a shuttle system to be determined. And I would ask Mr. Gruber if I included what he had made notes about.
Yes, ma'am. I think the only thing that, well, I know it's actually already in this, so we don't need to change it, but the free beach parking passes for residents and 2 per household. So those aren't changes. We just know that there's now a majority of support for that. But yes, you've captured everything else.
And I think that's in section 3, is that correct? Okay.
It is.
Thank you.
If I might, the last point with the employee parking, free at a remote site. I think it's a little vague. I think it's too vague for me.
Well, I would tell you from a staff standpoint, I think, understand what the request is, which we would need to identify location, hours, operating costs, but ultimately to create a system that would provide remote parking capabilities for designated employees, free of charge for presumably the time period that paid parking would be implemented. So it wouldn't be year-round, but it would be in line with the seasonal application.
Not to include Wild Wings property.
Correct, yes, not to include, we need to identify
like that in
that,
the motion,
either
not to-
USCB or some other place, but we would need to bring forward something that says it will be here, here's the hours of operation, here's the anticipated cost.
And I'd just like within the motion, if I may.
I can add to that, remote from the Coligny area location, including specifically Wild Wings property.
Okay.
How's that?
Yes, thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Anyone else, anything? Okay, do I have a second? All right, any discussion? All in favor, raise your right hand. Those opposed? All right, thank you all. If there are any other matters? No, not hearing any. We are adjourned. Thank you for your patience and time today, everyone. Your comments were appreciated.